Everyone, and welcome to In Deep Geek Live. Today we are going to be talking about Robert's Rebellion. I did a series of videos a year or so ago on Robert's Rebellion, going all the way through from the beginning to the end, just breaking it all down. But I don't think I did a live stream at the end with the Q&A session just to wrap everything up. So given that we did Rhaegar last week, I thought this would be a good opportunity just to tie all that back in together. What was actually going on right from the very early days through to the end? What is it that we're missing? What's the importance of this to the plot of the story that we have in front of us? So that's what we're going to be doing today. As always, I'm going to be framing this around questions that I've got from my patrons. And also trying to pick up as many questions as I can from the chat as we're going through. Just to say a quick thank you to Anthony Visconti. Thank you so much for the super sticker before we went live. And Ryan Larkin for saying, thanks for giving us something to look forward to during these crazy COVID times. Always quality content here and over on The Well Told Tale. The Well Told Tale is my other channel if you're interested in audio narrations. That's where I read what I think are the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever. So if you're interested in that, do go and check it out. And then Tota Sprachen Leben Länger saying, good stream, Robert, listening while building a palace in Spain. Beat that, people. What are you doing that's better than building a palace in Spain? What do you think is Robert Baratheon's best in-world historical foil? Rhaegar seems overlooked. Yeah, I think a lot of the Baratheons have got this kind of very similar up and atom kind of approach. What I always find fascinating, if you think about a foil for Robert Baratheon, is thinking about actually Stannis and how different they are. And yes, they both have this huge self-confidence to them. And yes, they have this kind of self-righteous fury, but it's one of them, Robert, is unbounded. He just charges around doing everything that he feels he ought to do. Stannis is a lot more contained, still driven. Very different approaches, but I always find that quite fascinating. And then obviously you get the other child, Renly, who is completely different again. And I think that what is fascinating, particularly about that family, is how you have these three brothers who share a lot, but are incredibly different in character. And Robert is a lot more kind of the traditional Baratheon feel to him. The other two slightly less so. But yeah, it would have been interesting to see them come up against each other. Drew, question, thank you so much, saying, are your views still the same on how Peter Baelish may have been involved in initiating Robert's Rebellion as when you made your excellent video? Thank you. Thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions on. I'm going to wrap that up, if that's okay with you, with a couple of questions I've got on from my patrons about this. For those who missed it, this was a video I did, oh goodness knows how long ago it was. It was part of that series. It was probably a year or more ago. It was called something like Robert's Rebellion was built on a lie, whose lie? And what I posited then, and I'll go through a little bit later when I've got the other questions, what I posited, go through the details and why, but what I posited was that the lie was Peter Baelish's. The lie was the lie which was told to Brandon Stark, which made him charge down to King's Landing, and that, out of everything, actually, was the thing which precipitated the war. The Rhaegar Lyanna thing, probably nobody would have known about it for quite a while, but for Brandon charging down there and confronting the Targaryens in their own castle, just outside their own castle. So that who told Brandon, because we're not actually told specifically anywhere who told him, we just say that he discovered, who he found out about it. That is absolutely crucial. Cesar Souza, thank you so much, saying, what do you think would have happened if Lyanna had survived Robert's rebellion? Well, I think a lot of this is conjecture. I've got a few of these kind of what-if questions, actually, in this live stream. I think a lot of people do look at this and go, well, clearly all of these things happened, but what if one specific thing changed? And it's always quite a fool's mission to try and chart out exactly where these things would be, because there are so many different moving parts. But this one, I think we can be reasonably certain of a few things. If Lyanna had survived at the Tower of Joy, she still would not have wanted to marry Robert Baratheon. And I genuinely don't think, after everything that had happened, Ned would have made her. I think probably something she would have wanted to keep the child herself, baby John. So I don't think they would have been separated, but probably Ned would have had to find her somewhere to hide. Maybe he would have taken her off in exile somewhere to Essos, something like that. But I think the fundamental point is that she would not want to marry Robert Baratheon. She would be avoiding it completely, and the safest place for her and for her child would be completely off the radar and hiding somewhere like Essos. So that's what I think would happen. Hi there, Sanrixian. I just saw you in the chat. I think I saw that Sanrixian, who is one of the many wonderful artists in this community, has got a little shop, which is online, which has opened up, and perhaps one of the moderators could put a link to it in the chat. I would highly recommend you go and check it out. She is excellent. Let's go to a question from Lady Pushkins over on Patreon. Hi, Robert. Do you think that Varys had any ulterior motive in encouraging Aerys to go to the tourney at Harrenhal, having not left the Red Keep in years? Yes, so this is the build-up to Robert's Rebellion, and we get the tourney at Harrenhal. Now, King Aerys II had not, as you say, I think it was 4 years that he hadn't left the Red Keep. This was after the defiance of Duskendale. He was getting increasingly paranoid, and he just didn't want to go anywhere, didn't want to expose himself to any danger in any way, shape, or form. And then Varys, it would appear, caught a whisper that this tourney at Harrenhal was Rhaegar's attempt to do something, to have an unofficial big council meeting, a great council with lots of the lords all gathering in one place to show them how great he would be as a king, and perhaps rally support for maybe a coup. So that was what Varys, it would appear, discovered and persuaded Aerys to go to Harrenhal and put a stop to this. By his sheer presence, that could then no longer happen quite as openly as it would otherwise have done. So that was what was what we're told happened. Why might Varys do that? Did he have an ulterior motive? I actually think no at this point, and I think that it's simply that when we look at Varys, we often think of him as the Varys that we have now. This is, nearly 2 decades later, the Varys that we have now. But then he was still relatively newly arrived in King's Landing in Westeros at all. He was newly appointed by Aerys as the Master of Whisperers. He'd been around for a little bit, but he wasn't around hugely long. And I think at this point, all the hints are perhaps that he was still relatively loyal. There's nothing to suggest otherwise. I will come to one little asterisk on that statement a little bit later with another question. But the Occam's razor suggests that he didn't have an ulterior motive, because sending Aerys there achieved what you would expect a loyal subject of Aerys to want to achieve there. He managed to prevent there from being a coup arranged at that point in time. So that it's all seems to flow through that perhaps actually that was just going exactly to what it would have been. And it was only after that that we start to see the worst excesses of Aerys, and with all the torture and burning and killing of Brandon and Rickard Stark, and with all that the Mad King was doing before Jaime killed him, all of that stuff was to come later. So we shouldn't assume that he looked at Aerys and thought, well, we have to get rid of this guy. I want to get on the other team. And Schumann Shirori, if that's how it's pronounced, saying, why did Tywin decide to take the side of Robert? Again, I think I've got a question on this in a moment, but I will happily answer this one first up here. The short answer that I will elaborate on a little bit later is that this is classic Tywin Lannister working out who's going to win, and then the moment he knows who's going to win, he then, at that point, he just goes in and makes sure that he is on their side. So he sets his army off and timed so that by the time they arrive at King's Landing, he will know the outcome of the Battle of the Trident. If Aerys and the Targaryens win, or Rhaegar, who was actually there, if they'd won, then he could say, I answered your call and I have arrived and here I am. Sorry, did I just miss that big battle? And he could have then come along with that and stayed on their side and looked loyal. If, as did happen, it turns out that Rhaegar and the Targaryens lost, Robert Baratheon won, then he could pretend to be loyal to Aerys and get in and do what he had to do, which is what was there. So this is pure political pragmatism from Tywin. I think there are another couple of nuances possibly we'll get onto them in a little bit, but that is the main reason for why he did it, was that he just saw he had to pick a side and he wanted to wait until he knew who was going to win. Fran Prouch saying, thanks for the videos. That's all. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much for the super chat. And Shona Childs, thank you very much. That's a very kind super chat saying, first live stream, welcome. And welcome to anyone. If it's your first live stream, it's a very different experience watching live. It's great to have you. Please do get involved in the chat. No question, but wanted to say thank you for the content that you produce. Have a restful, merry and safe Christmas. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. This is my penultimate live stream of the year. I've got something exciting planned for the next one, which I shall tell you about halfway through this. But I shall do this week, and then next week, the 2 weeks after that would have been Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. So yes, I will be around again next week, but then I will be very much taking a week or two off just to relax and enjoy the holiday season. Anshuman Shirori saying, why did Jaime sit on the Iron Throne? It's a really good question. I've just been doing a reread, or I am in the middle of doing a reread or re-listen to A Game of Thrones. And it's fantastic just actually hearing the story. I know the story really well, but having somebody read it to you means that you get different inflections, different things emphasized. You pick up on stuff you hadn't done before. If you're interested, then I'm tweeting my way through that over on Twitter. I'm using the hashtag IDGDoesAGOT. If you're interested, do go and check that out. I very recently, in fact, it might have been the last chapter I put some tweets up about, was the chapter. It's a sort of a throwaway chapter because there's not much action happens. It's just talking between Robert and Ned. And clearly Ned has to get something off of his chest, and he tells Robert Baratheon about what happened, about how Jaime had killed the Mad King and then he sat himself on the Iron Throne. And so we get Ned's perspective on it. We later get Jaime's perspective. And I think the short answer is that as Robert Baratheon says in response to Ned, there's nowhere else to sit down. That's the first thing. And secondly, Jaime was just waiting to see who was going to walk through that door. And thirdly, one of the things that we don't get so much, I think, from the TV show, but it does come out in the books, is that Tyrion describes him as never taking anything seriously. And he probably didn't think of it as being all that serious at the time. He was still relatively young. He was just waiting to see what happened. And he probably was expecting his father or his father's troops to be coming in, not Ned. So that was... that's why I think it was that he just didn't think it was as important as Ned thought it was. Totus Sprachen Leben Länger saying, given the similarities in arriving and claiming to be the victor the whole time, why is Tywin never called the late Lord Lannister? Because nobody mocks Tywin Lannister, I think, is the short answer. That is a reference to the late Walder Frey, who took so long raising his armies that he didn't manage to arrive in time for the battle, and so he was then mocked by the Tullys. Hoster Tully called him the late Walder Frey because he was late. What about Tywin? Nobody, I think, doubted that this was just a power play by Tywin, and he immediately got himself and his family into a hugely important position straight afterwards. His daughter married to the king, his son, a member of the Kingsguard, Ewan, he was the most powerful lord across the Seven Kingdoms. Nobody was going to mock him the way that they mocked the Freys. Question. Oh, Randy Bobandy, thank you so much for saying, I think you are a nice man. Thank you so much. I hope I am. Thank you. Question from the Lady Eternal saying, good time zone, Robert. Watching while making dinner. Excellent. I hope you enjoy your dinner. Overthrowing Aerys needed two things to happen, which Team Rhaegar lords were ready to do at the Harrenhal tourney. Why not try to stop Robert's killing Rhaegar at the Trident? So this is overthrowing Aerys needed to happen, which Team Rhaegar lords were ready to do. Why didn't they try and stop Robert killing Rhaegar at the time? Well, I think the fact is that Rhaegar had not really done a very good job of winning people to his side. Now, he was, it would appear, very much loved by the people, but in terms of rallying political support, if you look at the political tectonics of what was happening just before the war, the outbreak of the rebellion, then you see that the North, we often hear about Rickard Stark's Southron ambitions. They were starting to get engaged with politics. They were getting engaged with the Tullys. Ned was there with Lord Arryn. He was in the Eyrie being fostered. He was being fostered alongside Robert Baratheon. They were all linking together. The Tullys had a plan to be linking up with the Lannisters. There was an idea for Lysa initially to be marrying Jaime Lannister. So all of that was a lot of alliance building, which was not actually part of Rhaegar's big world. He kept a very close and quite small group around him who he trusted implicitly, rather than building a huge coalition. So it was him. The Dornish, House Martell, were clearly behind him. He had the Danes and a few other supporters, but he had not got a huge amount going on there. So in terms of why didn't people rally around him and stop Robert Baratheon, well, I think it's simply a matter of the fact that there weren't that many of them. His closest allies had pretty much already died or been exiled or anything like that. So by this point, or were stuck at the Tower of Joy. So by this point, actually, there weren't too many people. And added to which, he was convinced. This is another flaw in Rhaegar's character. We did Rhaegar last week on the live stream. He was 100% convinced that he was right. And he was 100% convinced that he was going to win the battle. He wasn't going to die. And so I think when Robert Baratheon went searching for him, as surely he did, that seemed to be Robert Baratheon's way of fighting battles, was to hunt down the leader of the opposition and then engage them one-on-one. I think Rhaegar would have been happy, because I thought he probably would think that he was going to win, and I don't think he had anything to be scared of. Question from Ariel Winchester saying, thank you for all you do. Thank you. Just a small show of appreciation for all you do, listening while I get ready for clinical. I'll finish listening later. Is that, clinical? I'm going to assume this is something in the medical world, and I'm going to assume from now on you're a doctor, and I shall doff my hat to you. But thank you. That's very, very kind, the super chat. Let's get some more questions from my patrons. And I said, this is a question from Eric Fogg, which is what I'd sort of teased that I had a little asterisk when talking about Varys and how loyal he was. Eric says, in a related question, you mentioned in a video that Varys was a likely suspect as tipping off Robert's forces about 3 loyalist Stormland lords. Could you elaborate? I'm happy to. So, he, being Robert Baratheon, at the start of the war, this is the context, at the start of the rebellion, he was at the Eyrie. That is not anywhere near where his army was. So he had to get out from the Eyrie, attack Gulltown, which was the major port in the Vale, destroyed that, get a boat out, evading the Targaryen fleet, go all the way around, come into Storm's End, rally his troops there, and then he's on the wrong end of the continent if he wants to link up with his allies who are all at the northern end of the continent, people like the Starks and the Tullys and the Arryns and all the rest of it. So he then had to bring, this is what the majority of the war actually was him trying to bring his forces up to the north to meet up with his allies. Now, what we hear is that not all of the Stormlanders were on his side. And in particular, there were 3 that decided that they were not going to answer the call to banners when he gave it. Instead, they were going to rally themselves together, form an army, and presumably then attack Robert Baratheon. They were forming, as a sort of a quirk of history, the place that they decided to form to meet up was Summerhall, which has a huge amounts of history and implications there linked in with Rhaegar in particular. But anyway, they formed up there. And what we read is that Robert Baratheon charged across to Summerhall, having been told about this by an informer, and then proceeded to fight 3 battles in one day, as each of these 3 lords appeared to meet to this muster. One army arrived, he defeated it. The second army arrived, he defeated that. The third army arrived, he defeated that. And that is all we know. So the question is, who is this informer? Now, I think the boring answer is probably not anyone that we hear of anywhere else. Probably this is just somebody who knows the Stormlands and was loyal to Robert Baratheon and so told him. Probably. If it's not, then who else would know about this? Well, Varys would surely know about it. Now, this, other than that, the fact that he is another person who was there, he is not named, who would know about it, and he was not named, the rest of it is tinfoil. So take it with as big a pinch of salt as you wish. But if Varys was, as is possible, thinking to himself, you know what, I've only just arrived here and got this job, I want to make sure that if there is, if the rebellion is successful, then I'm okay with the new person coming in. Maybe he fed a little bit of information at that point and to try and say, by the way, this is me, you can trust me and keep me in my job and not kill me. Because it is noticeable that when Robert Baratheon arrives, Varys just stays doing exactly the same job. Now, fine, there were a lot of people who carried on just doing the same job. Barristan Selmy kept his job, but Varys was the person who knew all of Aerys II's secrets. He had been the person who was preparing him all the way through this war. You would have thought that there must be a reason why Robert Baratheon kept him on, rather than simply that he thought he was good at his job. He must have thought that he was going to be loyal for some reason. So It's tinfoil, but it's possible. I think I had another one. Brennan Barnes, thank you so much, saying, how do you feel Cresson advised Robert at the onset of the war? Was he heeded? So we've got Cresson is the maester who we meet at the beginning of A Clash of Kings. He's the one who opposes Melisandre. Now, he was at Dragonstone, and I have to admit, off the top of my head, I don't know where he was stationed before that. So whether he was at Storm's End, we don't, or I don't know off the top of my head. What I can say is that at the very beginning of the war, Robert wasn't there. Robert was at the Eyrie. So it was him, it was Jon Arryn, and it was Ned Stark. And that was when the decisions were made. That was when the decision was made to go to war. Robert Baratheon headed south to join up with his army. Then Ned went north to start up his army. Jon Arryn stayed in the Vale and tried to gather his army around him there. That by the time Robert Baratheon got to the Stormlands, war was already underway. That they couldn't be stopped. It was then just a matter of how do you get out of it. And at some point, his brain will have clicked that, you know, actually, and again, we'll come on to this, but at some point, his brain clicked to say, okay, there's no way that we can just suddenly stop this now and everyone forgive everyone else and just go back to how it was before. We've got to have a complete change of who the king is. So I think by the time anyone in the Stormlands got involved in this, as far as Robert Baratheon is concerned, then I think that they were already committed to the course that they were going down. Ultraviolent saying, hi Robert, politically, is it more favourable for a house to be loyal to the crown or their main lord? Traditionally, how do houses usually align? Interesting question, because in peace times, they should be loyal to both. That's how it works. That's how it works the vast majority of the time. So you, in this kind of feudal-ish system that there is in Westeros, then you owe fealty to your lord, and then your lord owes fealty to the king, and that's the way it goes. So it's not that you've got this separate line up to the king. Yes, everybody owes their allegiance to the king, but you're on a day-to-day basis, it's you owe your fealty to your lord. So the question comes when there is this kind of big rebellion, or there's a civil war or something, and then you have the time when you may personally disagree with how your own liege lord picks their side, and you want to go on the other side. And we see that in things like the Blackfire Rebellion, here in Robert's Rebellion. It does happen when you get lords just going against what their sort of the superior lord wants. Politically, it really depends on the situation. If you get it right, if you pick right, then yes, it's politically advantageous. If you pick wrong, absolutely no. So there's a lot of examples of this. So John Connington, for example, the Conningtons, they're down in the Stormlands. So his liege lord was Robert Baratheon, but he obviously sided with the Targaryens. I already mentioned Gulltown. Gulltown decided to be loyal to the Targaryens rather than loyal to Jon Arryn, who was their lord of the Vale. So there's a lot of these different things that are going on. Some people win out of this, some people don't win out of this, and it's a matter of what happens afterwards. Now, with John Connington, we'll pick him up in a bit, but with John Connington, he opted for the Targaryen side, and unfortunately he got the worst of it all, because not only did he then fall in with Aerys II, fail him as Hand of the King and get stripped of all of his lands, but then when Robert Baratheon came into power, he wasn't going to give them back because he'd been on the opposite side. So he lost out both ways, unfortunately. Liege Lord. Thank you, Girl Nettles. Liege Lord is the term you're looking for. Yeah, absolutely. There's always words often evade me, but thank you so much. Mara Lee, thank you so much for the super sticker. That's incredibly kind of you. I've got some more questions from you coming up as well as we go through the live stream. Mara, as you're there, you know how much I appreciate you and your support, not just here, but all the way through the year has been absolutely amazing. So thank you so much, Mara, not just for me, but I know for a huge amount of the community as well. Vera Glauben saying, "Hi, Robert. Why did the townsfolk of the Stony Sept hide Robert Baratheon? I've always perceived Robert's Rebellion as a kind of a High Lord's Games. So why did the folk actively choose sides? Thank you for your videos and live streams. They are very insightful. By the way, I listened to your video while doing all sorts of things, mainly getting ready to sleep or doing my housework. So there we go. Maybe not quite the level of building a whatever it was, a palace in Spain, but that's doing housework. If I can speed along your housework, that's fantastic. But question about the townsfolk of Stony Sept. So this is the Battle of the Bells, or the build up to the Battle of the Bells. Now, as I said, what happened with a lot of the war, with a lot of the rebellion, was Robert Baratheon trying to get up north to get his forces to meet up with those of his allies. So after these three battles in one day, he then sort of like heads westwards a little bit, steering clear of Dawn. There was no point in him going there, heading just across towards the top of the Reach. Then they suffer a defeat, but the Mace Tyrell decides not to follow up, not to follow, and instead to go wander and camp outside Storm's End for a year, basically. Now, this was Randall Tarley's big victory in Robert's rebellion, and it was the only big defeat that Robert Baratheon suffered during the entire war. But some of his army survived this, and then they start heading north, going into the Riverlands, aiming to meet up with the Tullys who were there. That was also where they would eventually want to be meeting up with his other two allies. But on the way there, the Targaryens had sort of got this army under Jon Connington, and they were just sort of little battles here and there, splitting the army up, an ambush here, and the army gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually, although we don't know all of the details of how it happened, he ends up in this town called Stony Sept. And he hides out while Jon Connington and his army go house to house hunting for him. And he appears to be on his own in here. He gets hidden by the people of Stony Sept, passed from house to house. And eventually the combined army of his allies comes down and vanquishes the Targaryen army under Jon Connington, and Robert Baratheon is saved. They go up, and the war moves on. So the question is, why would these people in this town protect Robert Baratheon? I think there are a couple of answers to this one. Well, the first one was, we've been talking about this idea of, do you follow the king or your lord? The Stony Sept is in the Riverlands, so their liege lord was Hoster Tully. That was who they owed their allegiance to. Now, maybe that was part of why they decided to do it. Maybe they knew that there was a huge army coming. It's their area. They would probably have been aware of that. Maybe they kind of liked Robert Baratheon. These things we don't know. There are hints. The other thing I'd sort of add to this, that Stony Sept, if you go back and you kind of pick out the times that Stony Sept is mentioned in the sort of the wider world of the Song of Ice and Fire back through history, there are hints that perhaps they're not particularly loyal to the Targaryens, or in fact they might be quite anti-Targaryen. I think it was at the beginning of the Mystery Night, one of the Duncan Egg stories, then there's somebody who's preaching against the Targaryens, who gets strung up and caught at the town of Stony Sept. The implication being that he was preaching there, and it was only other outside people, Bloodraven, who went in and stopped him doing this. That the people if he was preaching there, the implication must be that the people there would be at least receptive, not hostile to the message. And there's also there are a couple of other examples of similar kinds of things where you hear about preachers who come from Stony Sept who seem to be preaching against Maegor's excesses and things like that. So we don't know, but the hints from the history are that they are an anti-Targaryen kind of town. And the fact that it's Stony Sept does seem to imply quite a link to the Faith of the Seven, and the Faith of the Seven, the Targaryens never really saw eye to eye. Let's go to the chat. I think I had a couple more questions there. If I can find them. Here we go. Russell Fulton, thank you very much, saying, if Varys is truly for the people, why did he tell the Mad King about Rhaegar's plan at the tourney at Harrenhal? So I think this is coming back to the fact that Varys, I think he, over time, he gained this understanding of we need to have a good king. I think he started out trying to influence a king and tried to make things serve the king who was there, but then he saw the great excesses of Aerys II, and then a new king arrived and he was trying to help and serve that king, and then after a few years he saw the excesses of Robert Baratheon, and that seems to have been the point when he decided, you know what, the people always suffer. The small folk are the ones who suffered. Therefore, I will try and get a better king. So that seems to be it. Not that his plan all his life was that he was going to have a wonderful king for Westeros. It was only after he'd been there for a while that he seemed to start hatching these plans. Kayvon Washington, thank you so much, saying, love the content and I'm glad I can catch your live stream. What do you think Storm's End's role is in the upcoming story, and how will Robert's rebellion parallel the rest of the wars in A Song of Ice and Fire? Keep up the great work. Thank you. That's very kind, first of all. In terms of Storm's End's role in the upcoming story, well, we've had a hint of it in the pre-release chapters from the Winds of Winter. Now, we now always have to put an asterisk next to that. George R. R. Martin has said that he is going back and rewriting some of them, or at least one of them, so we shouldn't take what we've been given as necessarily being 100% true. But in Arianne 2, I think it is, which is probably one of the ones more likely to be kept in its original form, because that was one of the ones that he'd originally written for inclusion in one of the earlier books, and then decided to take it out and include it in The Winds of Winter. In that, we hear that Storm's End has fallen to the forces of Fagon. Now, this is important because this is psychologically important, that the first of the big castles, and Storm's End is, although yes, it does change hands a few times over time, it is generally considered to be one of the hardest castles to actually take. So that is going to be a huge psychological win for Fagon when he arrives in, and that will be the basis for them to be then moving up the King's Road, which is then only about 2 weeks march away up the King's Road to take King's Landing. So I think that is going to be the main thing we've got going on there. Will it play any other role going forward? My guess is not another significant role going forward. I think that the main battles and fights will be all the way up in the north, and then around King's Landing, and then in the Riverlands, and that area, right, that is everything happens in around when you get the inn at the crossroads, the Ruby Ford, Harrenhal, the Isle of Faces, that area, those few square miles there, that's where things are going to be happening. How will Robert's rebellion parallel the rest of the wars in A Song of Ice and Fire? I don't think they're going to parallel exactly, to be honest. But what we're going to see probably is the same way that we get those alliances playing out. We might see things, the after effects of what happened then happening now. So, and what I mean by that is you get what I talked about earlier, when you got this huge battle, which was the one big victory for the Targaryen forces, Battle of Ashford Meadow, when you get the army of the Reach under Mace Tyrell that defeated the Baratheons, or at least the forward part of it defeated them, that being Randall Tarly. And then when the main force arrived, they just sort of gave up and went away, effectively. Now, that, I think, has very much coloured Randall Tarly's view on events and who he should be siding with, and whether it is with his own liege lord, with Mace Tyrell. I suspect we're going to see that he decides not to. He is quite a big player right now in King's Landing at the moment of time in the books. And so I think what is not that we're going to see echoes of one or the other, but we're going to see the long-term impacts of where people feel betrayed all the way back there. Gus Mulder, thank you so much, saying, do you think Robert's army vanishing before the Battle of the Bells has some meaning, or is it a plot hole? No, I don't think they vanished. I think what happened was, first of all, the Stormlands, the army that they can raise is not huge. This is one of the smaller parts of the Seven Kingdoms, where I think, off the top of my head, 20,000 they could muster. He had to muster them very quickly, and so the number that he would get would be a lot smaller, added to which he obviously had to leave some people at home to be fortifying the Stormlands as a whole, because otherwise people just come in and take the castles when they went away. We know that at least 3 of the lords of the Stormlands were against him, so he didn't have a full complement there to start with. Then we know that they fought 3 battles in one day. Even if they'd won each of those battles, which they did, they would have lost some troops. Then they definitely lost the next battle. Then against the armies of the Reach, then we get told that there was this kind of like, it feels almost like a guerrilla warfare, where you get small battles, skirmishes, as they're moving up through the Riverlands. So the army didn't just disappear. I think it just slowly, its strength got sapped. And my best guess, there is a gap here in the narrative. We haven't been told exactly how it happened, but my best guess is that Robert Baratheon eventually decided stealth was probably the best way forward, rather than just in one big army, or whatever was left of his army heading north. He would try and sort of stealthily meet up with his allies. So I think that was what was going on there. Where have we got to? David Zalewski, thank you so much, saying your work ethic is incredible, and I wanted to show some love. That's very kind of you. I sometimes don't feel as if my work ethic is incredible, but I'm very grateful for it. Who is your favorite warrior that was alive during Robert's Rebellion? I don't know whether they count as a warrior, but I think Arthur Dane has to be, simply because of the legends and the sword and all the rest of it. And I think one of the things that isn't emphasized much is the fact that he was, it would appear, the greatest fighter in the land, and everyone knew that. And so he would also be a great morale boost, a great figurehead, and yet he never got involved in any of the big battles. He just hung around at the Tower of Joy. So that has to have been a significant issue. What would have happened if he'd come up against Robert Baratheon? Probably slightly different. We will never know. But for me, that is one of the big turning points, is the fact that he was not actually involved in any of these battles. James Hunting, thank you so much for Super Chat, just saying, love your videos and streams. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Darth Whiffy asking if there's any chance Rhaegar survived the Battle of the Trident. Robert dreaming about killing him every night is a big red flag for me. I did a video on this if you're interested, so I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I think it is beyond any reasonable doubt that he is dead. He was killed in full sight of everyone in the middle of a battlefield. People scoured his body to take out the rubies. Then his body was burned. It was him. He died. There's no doubt about this whatsoever. So yes, I think he is definitely dead, and he did definitely die. Beth, thank you so much, saying it's mentioned that Rhaegar wounded Robert at the Ruby Ford grievously. Is it possible that Rhaegar believed himself won and underestimated the sheer determination of Robert, the Demon of Trident? Well, I would have to have a look at the details of exactly what was said. I don't think it was specifically said that Rhaegar was the one who injured Robert Baratheon, but yes, he did get injured to the extent that he sort of hung around for a while. It wasn't a grievous wound. We don't read anywhere about that when he's still got this horrible gash left over from his fight there. But it kept him out of action for a while. This is why he sent Ned on first down to King's Landing, and he stayed behind for a little bit, just recovering. It was bad, but it wasn't, I think, grievous. And I don't think we know that it was Rhaegar. You're saying that might Rhaegar have believed him that he had won? Possibly. I think Rhaegar thought that he was going to win anyway, so I don't think this made huge amounts of difference to it. I think Rhaegar was full with as much self-confidence as it's possible for a human to be filled with. So, yeah, I don't think that would have made too much specific difference in that moment. The Lady Eternal, thank you so much, saying, love your take on a theory I saw. Littlefinger was at the inn at the crossroads when Rhaegar and co picked up Lyanna. He fed Brandon the lie that it was kidnapping, knowing Brandon's rage would get him probably jailed or killed. Yeah, I've got a video saying that exact thing. If you go and have a look for it, that was the one I was talking about a little bit earlier, called Robert's Rebellion was built on a lie. Whose lie? I think that was exactly. In fact, I can't remember. I think I've got some questions coming later, so I'll wrap them up now, actually, just for those who haven't come across this. This is mapping out what happened. And I'll explain the bits that we know, and I'll try and show you where the gaps are and why I think that this makes sense. So what we know is that Littlefinger was at River Run, and he was there with Brandon Stark, who was also there at the time. Brandon Stark and Catelyn, who was at the time Catelyn Tully, were engaged to be married, and then Littlefinger, who was in love with Catelyn, challenged Brandon to a duel for her heart and her love and her hand and all the rest of it, and basically he got beat up badly. And Brandon didn't kill him, but he did damage him badly, and he was then incapacitated for a couple of weeks. During that time, it would appear that he impregnated Lysa, and basically Hoster Tully did not like him at all. And we know that Brandon, hot-headed, he will have hated Littlefinger with a passion for everything that happened. Littlefinger was told the moment that he was well enough to travel, he had to get out there and go back. Where back was the Fingers, which is at the far end of the Vale. So this we all know. Littlefinger then headed out. This is after the turning at Harrenhal. He then headed out eastwards. He will have been moving probably reasonably slowly, and he will have been going down the main road. I think it's called the River Road, which will have taken him to the inn at the crossroads. The inn at the crossroads is where people go to stop the night before heading off into the one main road which goes up in the mountain road up into the Vale. That is the route he would have gone. This much we know. We also know that that was the year of the full spring. The tourney at Harrenhal happened during that nice sunny time, and then after that, that's when the snows started coming in. That's when the winter returned. It was a full spring. It didn't then move on into summer. It went straight back to winter. And we know that then what happens is that one of the first things that gets affected is that mountain road up into the Vale. So that probably what would have happened, given the timing that we know, is that Littlefinger will have arrived at the inn at the crossroads, then realised that he couldn't carry on. So what's he going to do? He's going to hang around at the inn at the crossroads. That all seems to make sense. Brandon left on a mission that he didn't tell people what it was about, but we know that he will have been furious about Littlefinger, and he will feel that he had to enact some more retribution in some way. Again, this we know, he headed off. It appears that he headed off eastwards. It seems logical that he was following Littlefinger. It seems logical that he will have found him at the inn at the crossroads, given that that is where it was. And we know that the meeting of Rhaegar and Lyanna happened within that area, somewhere around that area. It's all tied in together. Near Harrenhal, the inn at the crossroads, we're told that that's round about where it was. Now, what we don't know is who saw Rhaegar and Lyanna. Someone did. Someone spotted this and told Brandon. Now, it has to be someone who was in that kind of area at the time, and it has to be somebody who's got a reason for doing this. Now, Littlefinger is the only person we know of who is definitely there. And we know that he's got a history of this kind of thing. In my mind, I imagine, Brandon pushes him up against the wall and is going to beat him up some more or something like that for all the wrongs that he did to the Tullys. And then Littlefinger's trying desperately to think of a way out of this, and he tells him about what happened with, you'll never guess what, Rhaegar went off with your sister. And we know he will have seen, Littlefinger probably was at the tourney at Harrenhal, and he will have seen how Brandon reacted. Brandon was the person who reacted most strongly when Rhaegar crowned Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty. So Littlefinger will have known how Brandon would have reacted. So it makes perfect sense that that is exactly what happened. What would Littlefinger have expected to happen then? Well, we do not know. But clearly, at this time, he will have seen that chaos ensued if you just sow a little seed. And this also is a perfect bit of background for why is it that Littlefinger is so convinced that chaos is a ladder. Because he created some chaos back at Robert's Rebellion, and that allowed him to climb the ladder, because it did. In the wake of that, he managed to get himself in charge of the port at Gulltown, and in the wake of that, then moving on up to be Master of Coin in King's Landing. So he got this idea of chaos as a ladder from seeing the chaos that could ensue and how he could climb the ladder in that chaos. So that's the theory. I probably haven't explained all of the intricacies of it, but do go and have a look at that video if you are interested in that. Let's see. I think I had one more question I was going to pick up in the chat. Tates Bracken Leben Langer saying, can't find my Patreon questions anymore. I've got questions from you, I think, in coming up actually in just a moment, saying, what sort of Lord Diminished influence would Robert have made if Aerys had died at Duskendale? Yeah, so if Aerys had died at Duskendale, again, this is one of these speculative things. If Aerys had died at Duskendale, then Rhaegar would have taken over, and Rhaegar would have been king. Rhaegar would have then been able to decide who he married, and maybe he wouldn't have chosen Elia. Who knows? So it's all very up in the air. In terms of Robert would probably have been like he was as king, but as lord. That's probably, I don't think you're going to change the character of the man. I think that he would have been exactly as he was, but as the Lord of the Stormlands, rather than as the King of the Seven Kingdoms. Yes, his influence would have been diminished, but I think he would still be this larger-than-life character who then slowly over time lost that edge of being this the magnificent fighter that he was to start with. Shah here is the questions, saying, at what point during the war did Robert plan on becoming king? As the war was started by Jon Arryn refusing to give up Ned and Robert for execution, it won't have been from the start. No, it wasn't at the start. He didn't start the war with the intention of becoming king. What we're told is that at some point, well, this is in the World of Ice and Fire, at some point around the Battle of the Trident, or a bit before the Battle of the Trident, he decided that he wanted to become king. As I said, I think that it reached the point where he realized that either he or Rhaegar was going to have to die. And if Rhaegar was going to die, did he want Aerys on the throne? No. Aerys was the one who had killed his best friend's brother and father, and also, incidentally, Jon Arryn's heir was also killed during that same thing. We don't talk about that huge amounts, but Jon Arryn, who was their foster father, he also had huge losses from there. And I think, so Aerys has got to go, so then who's left? Do you want Viserys, who's this young boy at the time? Quite possibly not. Do you really want the Mad King's son to be the king? And at that point, I think it probably dawned on him, well, I could do it. I could be king. And I think that is where it was, is that his initial thinking was survival and rebellion and all the rest of it. I don't think he was this long-term strategic thinker. It was only later on, perhaps it was the influence of people like Jon Arryn, who's saying, okay, we now have to think slightly more than just how do we fight another battle. Then I think that's the point at which he decided he would be king. Jon Arryn wouldn't want to be king. Ned wouldn't want to be king. There's only really one option. Lee Roberts saying, hi Robert, hope you're doing well. My question regarding Robert and his choice to take the throne. Why did none of the High Lords that took part in the rebellion not speak against this choice or request a High Council meeting? Was it a decision made because they believed he had the best claim due to his Targaryen grandmother, or something else? Thanks for all the great content. Well, thank you. In terms of why nobody said, let's have a great council about this, why didn't all the rest of it? Robert Baratheon was not the Robert Baratheon that we think of. We think of Mark Addy. I thought did an excellent job, actually, in season 1 of Game of Thrones, really inhabiting that character. And we think of this kind of like Henry VIII figure with all the feasts and the laughter and the drunken debauchery and all the rest of it. In his younger days, at the point during Robert's rebellion, he was an absolute man mountain. He was unstoppable. He was 6.5 feet tall, this huge war hammer. He was not only winning battles, but he was the person who was doing the fighting. He was the person who was winning and killing the lords. He sought them out battle after battle. He actively sought out the lord of the opposition and went single-handedly, one-on-one, and killed them. He was a force of nature, and so people were not standing against him. And he had behind him a huge array of other people. So he already had, obviously, the Stormlands, because that was his area, but he had the North, he had the Vale, he had the Riverlands. Tywin Lannister came around behind him as well. Then suddenly you got pretty much all of the Seven Kingdoms. The Greyjoys were never really going to have much of a say. The Martells were very loyal to Rhaegar, but they weren't really involved anymore. And the the Tyrells had basically just decided not to get involved. So that's where we're at, was that he had people behind him, and when he said he wanted to be king, then they made him king. That was as simple as it was. If they'd had a great council, then he would have made sure that the people all voted the way that he wanted to, because he had the support. So that's why. Fabulist says, sort of building on this, we know that Robert won the throne by strength of arms, but isn't it weird that there's no attempt to draw attention to his tenuous Targaryen heritage? Thinking of your Henry VII. Henry VII was the king at the end of the Wars of the Roses who had he had heritage from Lancaster, House Lancaster, and he married somebody from House York to kind of unite the houses. No attempt to draw attention to his tenuous Targaryen heritage. I think everybody recognized that he won the throne by the fact that he won the war, and that's it. Yes, he then could claim that he had Targaryen heritage, and he did. His grandmother was a Targaryen, and that probably, if you kind of mapped it out, probably did make him in line somewhere, depending on your interpretation of all of the lines of succession. Then if you kill off Aerys and Rhaegar, you've got Viserys, and then if you say that Dany can't and Rhaegar can't because they're female, then he probably is next in line. So they didn't have to justify it because he was in power. No Scar saying, hi Robert, just reviewing Fire and Blood and was wondering if Baratheons were verified to be related to the Targaryens. Yes, they were, as I say. So his grandmother was Rhaegal Targaryen, who doesn't seem to have lived very long, but definitely was. So he is part Targaryen. He has a Targaryen grandmother. And I think I had question in the chat. I thought I did anyway. So AK Channel TV, thank you, saying, personally, I don't see how Robert didn't insult Stannis, first with Dragonstone and then with the role of Hand of the King. Even Cersei says so. Yeah, so he did insult him, and so from Stannis's perspective, for those who kind of missed this nuance, so Stannis was left when Robert Baratheon came back, gathered an army, and went to fight his war. Storm's End is the Baratheon castle. That's their ancestral home, and he said to Stannis, hold the castle. And then for a year, the massed might of the largest army in all of Westeros, which is the army from the Reach, and one of the largest navies, which is the Red Wine Fleet, were besieging it. And Stannis stood firm for a year and almost died. They were down to eating dead rats and all the rest of it. And this is where Davos, being the Onion Knight, bringing in supplies, saved the day. But Stannis did absolutely everything that was asked of him. And then after that, after he gets relieved, Robert says, right, now go take Dragonstone. And Stannis goes, okay, right, I need to build the fleet first before I can do that. So he builds the fleet. Then he heads up to Dragonstone. But unfortunately, by that point, then Viserys and the newly born Dany had escaped and were over in Braavos. So the Robert Baratheon blamed him. Now, by giving him Dragonstone, what he's doing is one of these kind of things where you couldn't really say that this was a bad gift, because being Prince of Dragonstone was the sort of the hereditary equivalent of being the next in line. That was, if you were next in line, you generally had Dragonstone as your seat. So Stannis at the time was the next in line until Robert Baratheon had children, so he gave him Dragonstone. But Dragonstone is smelly, and it's dark, and it's grey. The Targaryens love it, but no one else does. And it's also slightly out of the way, and it doesn't have huge amounts of lands and all the rest of it, whereas Storm's End does. It's very lush. You get the Rainwood there. Yes, you've got the sea and all the rest of it, but it's a great place. And so Renly got that, and this is why everyone thinks Renly got the good deal. In terms of the Hand of the King, Stannis might have thought that he should have been Hand of the King, not when Jon Arryn was made Hand of the King. I don't think anyone disputed the fact that Jon Arryn was a good choice, because it had to be somebody that Robert Baratheon knew and respected, and was older and more experienced than him, but because Stannis was relatively young at the time. But when he died, Stannis might have expected to be made Hand of the King, because Ned Stark didn't want it, frankly. But this does seem to all stem from the fact that Robert Baratheon obsessively wanted to get rid of the Targaryens, because he knew that the Viserys had a claim to the throne. Whether or not you thought it was a right claim or fair claim, whatever, he knew that he did, and he knew that people would theoretically rally to Viserys. And the fact that Viserys escaped, he blamed it on Stannis, because he basically told Stannis that was his job, to stop the Targaryens from getting away. Now, so I think he just kept that grudge going all the way through. Yes, it was an insult in a way, but I think that was what Robert Baratheon was intended. He didn't trust him, not as much as he trusted Ned. The more or closer than brothers is a phrase that's used of them, and that, I think, is very clear, is that Robert Baratheon viewed Ned as being closer than Stannis. Will Foreign, not sure if asked, but what elements of Robert's rebellion will be echoed as Mance versus Stannis / Baby Swap did? Any stand out to you in particular? Love you, King Robert. Thank you very much. What elements of Robert's rebellion will be echoed? Well, I did answer this a little while ago. I think that the issue is not a matter here of one thing echoing the next, other than the climactic battle in the region of Harrenhal, Isle of Faces, Ruby Ford. That is going to be crucial again. So that you could call it an echo if you wish. But I don't think the war itself is going to be a particular echo. This is more, what we've got is a lot more of a multifaceted civil war than Robert's Rebellion, which was very much one side against another side. So I think that's what we are instead going to get are the implications of things which happened then being played out now. Okay, let's go to question from Eric Fogg. And actually, Eric, just while I remember, you gave a super chat thanking me for the extra question on Patreon. You're very welcome. You can put the extra question on there, not a problem. But thank you so much. Saying, why was Robert so enthusiastic about tracking down the Knight of the Laughing Tree? This is an interesting one. So this is going back to the tourney at Harrenhal. Now, in the tourney at Harrenhal, the Knight of the Laughing Tree turns up, defeats 3 knights, the 3 knights of the 3 squires who'd beaten up Howland Reed, and then disappears. Now, what we read is that this caused a huge commotion. Yeah, having a mystery knight happens a few times there, but a mystery knight who then completely disappears again, particularly when we've got this very fevered political atmosphere going on, which was going on at the tourney at Harrenhal. Then people wanted to know who this was. Now, Aerys was paranoid, and so he sent Rhaegar after the Knight of the Laughing Tree. But we also read that Robert Baratheon and Richard Lonmouth, who he was drinking with, were also, they went off and they wanted to find out who this was. They didn't apparently find out, but they also got involved. Now, what do we know about them and that dynamic? Well, they were drinking. We know this. We get we hear from, I think it's from Howland, talking about the two of them having lots of drinking games. So they seem to have been very close. They were Richard Lonmouth is a Stormlands lord, or knight. So he Robert Baratheon was his liege lord, so they knew each other. But the other thing which was interesting about Richard Lonmouth is that he was Rhaegar's squire, and he was part of that close-knit group. Now, why would Rhaegar want to know who this Knight of the Laughing Tree was? Well, probably because the whole idea here was for this Rhaegar to turn up and to show everyone what a wonderful and gallant knight, and to win the tourney. That does seem to have been part of the plan. It wasn't the whole plan, but it was part of the plan. And to have a mystery knight coming in, this added in a layer of something extra. So I imagine that Rhaegar will have wanted to know who this was for himself, in order to know what's going on, who's here trying to make this political point. And Richard Lonmouth, as I said, was one of his closest companions, and I think probably he would have then gone to try and find who it was for Rhaegar. And he happened to be with Robert Baratheon at the time, so I think that was what was going on there. We don't have any more information from that, but that does appear to be the sort of the dynamic that we've got going on. Quick thank you to my moderators. You do a fantastic job, moderators. Thank you so much. If you are watching this live, please do go and give them some love. Mara Lee, coming to one of your questions, and thank you for the super chat beforehand, saying a show of love and support and appreciation for all the fabulous content, stories, and merch. Yes, I have merch if you're interested. I've got a website, indeepgeek.com. Always forget I'm looking around. Nope, not got any merch again. Not good at selling merch, but if you're interested in t-shirts and mouse mats and things like that, and also audiobooks, if you like listening to audiobooks, I do downloadable MP3s of some of the greatest science fiction and fantasy stories ever. If you're interested in that, go and check out indeepgeek.com. Mara's question was, besides the issue of Lyanna and Rhaegar, what were some of the other main reasons for Robert's rebellion? Right. I think it's worth pointing out when we're talking about the reasons, and I hinted at this earlier, but I think it's definitely worth emphasizing it, is that although we think of this as being all about Rhaegar and Lyanna, and that's certainly how it seems to have survived in the imagination of Robert himself, King Robert himself, that seems to have been how he's justified what happened. But at the time, the actual thing that sparked it was this call for Jon Arryn to give up Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon and send them to King's Landing, because almost certainly they would have been killed. Now, why do we think that almost certainly they would have been killed? Because Aerys II had completely lost the plot by that point. He just killed Ned Stark's brother, his father. He just killed Jon Arryn's heir, and a whole host of other people as well who, yes, Brandon had been a little bit rash, so, shall we say, but to be murdering all those people and then calling other people, this was not just a matter of a righteous war to try and save Lyanna from whatever horrific things were being imagined was happening to her. And I think they were being imagined. I think this was entirely consensual between Rhaegar and Lyanna, just in case you were unaware of my view on that point. But this was also a matter of survival. They could not, the point had been reached very, very quickly, where Ned and Robert and Jon Arryn had to decide, were they going to go to King's Landing and probably be killed, or were they going to rise up in open rebellion against their king? And it was as simple and as stark as that. There's lots of things that led up to it, but that was the point at which they made a decision, and it was no decision at all, really. They were never going to just wander up to King's Landing and hand themselves over. So it was a matter of survival for them as much as anything else. Jedi Spartan 42, thank you so much, saying SoCal costs too much, can't do Patreon, but can give a little every once in a while. Thank you so much. I know Patreon isn't for everyone. I will do my, as you've raised it, if you do want to support this channel, if you want to get access to some extra stuff I do for my patrons, please do go and check out my Patreon page. There's a link down in the description. It's genuinely the thing which allows me to devote the time and energy and attention to this. Knowing that I've got that regular support from my patrons, it means huge amounts to me, which is why I try and give a little bit back by allowing patrons to have the questions here on for the live streams, priority questions, things like that. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, the best way to do it is through Patreon, but I appreciate not everyone can. And if you can't, then and if you can do little super chats, then that is incredibly generous. And if you can't do super chats, just likes and shares and things like that are also amazing, not just for me but for other content creators. So I entirely understand that not everyone can do a Patreon, but thank you. Have you done anything on the best warriors in the books for current time in A Song of Ice and Fire? And my moderators are boss. Yes, my moderators are indeed boss. I agree with that completely. Have I done anything on the best warriors in the books for current time in A Song of Ice and Fire? No, I haven't, so I'd have to go away and have a think about that. And I think it really depends on what you count as current time, because a lot of them sort of go up and down. Like Jaime was a great fighter, then he lost his hand and was not so good, and so on. So I'd have to have a think about that. But yeah, there were, I mean, if I were to pick some of the greatest, then it would be people like the Mountain, quite clearly. You would get Braavosi, First Lords, who are chosen, well, they're often chosen for how well they spot things, but in terms of fighting skills, you can't get much better than them. And then you also get, if you have the Mountain, then you also obviously have to be thinking about the Red Viper as well, Oberyn Martell, who did, but for his own hubris, he did defeat the Mountain. So there are some amazing fighters in A Song of Ice and Fire, but it really depends at which point in the story, because a lot of them do go up and down. Kelly Johnson, thank you so much, saying, will we see a more in-depth star-crossed romance between Jon Aerys and the Cliff Notes version in the show, and is there a marriage foreshadowed? Well, we will get more. Okay, I'll give you my the sort of the sigh was just thinking back to that romance on the show. On the show, basically what we had was that they got together in almost the last scene of season 7, and before the end of the first episode of season 8, Jon had discovered that she was his aunt. So we only got, I think, 1 or 2 scenes of them actually as a couple, and I think that was part of the problem for buying into their relationship, was the fact that we never actually had the chance to see them together. So yeah, that was not great. Will we see more in the books? Yes, definitely. I think that George R. Martin, he's not just going to give us like a chapter of them being together and then other stuff. And we will also see more, because this is from points of view from the characters. We will see their own feelings develop. So this won't just be about a matter of a few minutes of screen time. We'll actually be able to see them and how they're feeling and experience it through their eyes, as it were. So we will get a whole lot more going on there. Is a wedding or marriage foreshadowed? No, not necessarily. I think that love is there. I think I haven't seen anything that specifically is that she has to get married. The only thing is the Dany's visions in the House of the Undying, when she has these kind of like three loves. The implication is, but because she's got married twice now so far in the books, perhaps that there is a third on the cards, because everything that she was being shown was in threes. So that's the main thing which is kind of doing there. But the more important is the fact that there will be a developing relationship that we will see through their eyes, not just through a couple of scenes on screen. Totus Bracken Langer, how many eyes does Lord Bloodraven have? 1,000 eyes and one. Yeah, he's an amazing character. And talking about the Bloodraven, question from my Patreon. I didn't note down who this was. Saying, hello, Robert. It seems to me that Bloodraven and Howland Reed were working to get Rhaegar and Lyanna to meet, but it didn't seem to be their intention to start a rebellion. Do you think the rebellion was an unintended consequence of their meddling? Was Aerys' madness a result of his or Bran's meddling in some way? How much of what happened was part of the plan? Okay, I think you're definitely right that the main intention there was to get Rhaegar and Lyanna together at the Turning at Harrenhal. So I think that was the main thing. Can we see Bloodraven and Howland's role in the actual war? No, is the honest answer. I don't think we can see that. I think it would be pushing things too far to sort of give that one to Bloodraven. But it is, if you were to pick what would Bloodraven's ideal outcome be, it would be that the person that he wanted born, Jon Snow, who he will see as the prince that was promised, is not just stuck down in King's Landing, one of many princes down there, but is brought up to be believing in a family which sort of worships the old gods to a greater or lesser extent, that ends up at the Wall, much closer to where he wants him to be, an area where he can then start influencing him. If you go through my Bloodraven series, you'll see all the ways I think that he is trying to influence Jon. Ghost is a prime example there. White fur, red eyes, very much the Bloodraven symbolism. And clearly, I think, when you go through it, Ghost is being guided by Bloodraven to be getting Jon the things that Bloodraven thinks that he needs. So that is the right outcome. Does that mean that Bloodraven and Howland Reed caused the war to happen? Not necessarily, but I think they ended up with the right result from their perspective anyway. Strong Belwas, I see, is being mentioned a few times in terms of fighters in the chat. Yeah, he's clearly a very good fighter over in Essos, in Marine. Question from Googly Woogly saying, hello from sunny Palm Springs, California. Hi, California. Perhaps you can help me get my head wrapped around something. After Rhaegar met Lyanna, how long did it take for the rebellion to actually begin and ultimately end? Cheers. Okay. George R. R. Martin is deliberately vague on dates and things like this, so we do not have a hard and fast answer, but we've got various things that we can, sort of temposts that we can kind of map our way through it. So after Rhaegar met Lyanna, what happened was that Harrenhal, the tourney at Harrenhal, everyone sort of went back off their separate ways, and Rhaegar headed down to Dragonstone. There at Dragonstone, his baby Aegon was born. Elia gave birth to Aegon. That happened at the turning of the year, effectively. So we don't know how far into the year the tourney at Harrenhal was, but I think we could imagine a few months there. Rhaegar seems to have left quite swiftly after the birth of his son. He hung around for a little bit, but headed off reasonably swiftly afterwards. And then we're told that he set off on his journeys that eventually led him to be picking up Lyanna, which implies that he didn't go direct there. I think the most likely solution is that he went via Summerhall with his closest companions. That, if that's the case, then that's Dragonstone, getting a boat across, then riding to Summerhall, then from Summerhall riding up to Harrenhal or thereabouts. Again, that's a matter of a couple of months, probably. So what we're looking at is less than a year, but a few months from Lyanna and Rhaegar first meeting and them meeting up again for what became known as the abduction. So that's how long that was. The war itself, again, we're not told exactly how long it is, but what we do know is that after that, it took a couple of weeks for Brandon, who then charged down the King's Road to get to King's Landing. After that, all of the fathers of those people who'd gone down to King's Landing, because it wasn't just Brandon, he had some friends with him, their fathers were all summoned. That would have taken at least another couple of weeks, probably a bit more. And then after they were killed, then we had the summons to Ned and Robert Baratheon to come. So at that point, that's when the war started. So we've got, I don't know, maybe a 4 to 6 week period there from when Rhaegar and Lyanna, Rhaegar picked up Lyanna through to the start of the war. Then we get told it lasts over a year, up somewhere between a year and 18 months. Again, we have a few little things that we can sort of pick up on. Timing wise, we know, for example, that Robb was conceived within a 2-week period after Ned and Kat got married. And then shortly after he was born, they then headed up to Winterfell. So we can sort of chart out that 9 months plus a journey time of, if they were going slow, let's call that another 3 months. So that's about a year from the point at the halfway point of the war when Ned and Robert and everyone was at Riverrun before the Battle of the Trident, to the point where everyone was back home again. So that's the kind of the timescales that we're looking. The whole thing is done and dusted within 2 years, is what we're saying. But George R. R. Martin is deliberately vague on the timings, and I think that's fair, because people like me and many of us would pick into the details of these, and inevitably there would be some small time differentials here and there. So I will allow him to be vague on it. Kelly Johnson, do you think Tolkien's most twisted tale, The Children of Húrin, influenced the twisted, incest-fueled style of Martin? Yeah, so this is a tale, it's now a book you can buy on its own, Children of Húrin, but this is also one of the stories from the Silmarillion, way back in the history of the Lord of the Rings world, and basically, yes, somebody marries his sister without realizing it, and it all gets very dark and gloomy. This is not original to Tolkien, we have to say. It's, if you look, there's quite a few Greek myths where people mistakenly marry relatives and all the rest of it. So I think that it's I don't think that this is one of the ways that we can say that George R. R. Martin was getting his inspiration from Tolkien specifically, but the sort of the incest-fueled style of Martin, he has quite a lot of emphasis on that in a way that is more Tolkien largely draws a veil over these things rather than emphasizing them. And I think, if anything, George R. R. Martin is getting inspiration from earlier mythologies for that part of what he's about. Wort Up, thank you so much, saying hi, first time catching you live. Welcome. It's great to have you here, and welcome anyone else if it's your first time. Do you think that the Maester conspiracy with Robert's Rebellion was pushed by the Hightowers? What was the Hightowers' actions during the rebellion, other than one of them being the Kingsguard? Okay, so the Great Maester Conspiracy. I'm going to do another Maester Conspiracy video at some point soon. I think I've sort of touched on one unexpectedly in a video which is coming out next week. You'll see it when it arrives. I started writing it not wanting to do a Maester Conspiracy one and ended up doing a Maester Conspiracy one. But I'm going to do one about the Maesters and the end of the dragons, because this is a question I get asked a lot. Were the Maesters involved in... Did the Maesters kill the dragons? The theory here goes that the Maesters... Maybe they were involved in the Doom of Valyria. Maybe they were involved in the Dance of the Dragons, killing the dragons. It would make sense that they would want to be getting rid of the Targaryens at the end of all of this. Once they've gone, why on earth would you want people who are still obsessed after all that time, still obsessed by dragons and trying to bring dragons back and all the rest of it? So if they've got the opportunity to get rid of the Targaryens, then maybe they would. I can buy into that. I think that the evidence for this is a lot less than the evidence for some other things that the Maesters are about. You could certainly argue that they had been having diminished power and influence in the light of the pyromancers being the favoured experts of Aerys II. So yes, you could argue that that's what's going on there. But were they pushing this? There are the hints that we get about the Southron ambitions, and this was a Maester who was trying to push it. Maester Wallace, I think it was, turning the Starks to face the South. I think we have to not believe every single thing we hear about the Maesters. They are clearly suspect for a lot of different things, but I don't think there is yet the evidence that they caused this in any way. Certainly, the Hightowers kept a low profile during Robert's Rebellion. They will have been a part of the main Tyrell force, but as we've already seen, the main bulk of the Tyrell force actually never got into combat with anyone. It was only the fact that you had someone like Randall Tarley, who was a lot more efficient and a lot keener to get involved in combat. That was the only reason why the Reach forces ever got into any fights at all. But the Hightowers largely kept everything on the down low. And that seems to be, the more you go back through the House Hightower, you see that they wait to see which way the wind is blowing more often than not, and then they just go with it. This is what happened with the Andal invasion. They saw that the Andals were there, and they went, okay, fair enough. We'll marry into the Andals, and then we'll tell them that, you can build the Starry Sept here, and this could be the home for your religion. And they got completely on board with it when the Targaryens arrived, threw open the gates, and they said, "Come in, and you know what? We'll even crown you king here." That seems to be more the Hightowers, rather than going out and trying to influence things. They tend to sort of hold back a little bit. Their main concern is making sure that their area is kept. So Was it pushed by the High Towers? I think they were okay with it happening, but I don't think they specifically were pushing it. Kelly Johnson, what are the best sites for posting Game of Thrones fan fiction or art? Well, I will pass that one on to the chat. If you actually, I think that there are other people there. I know that if you go to, say, Deviant Art, then there's a lot of good art on there for Game of Thrones stuff. You can post it on places like Reddit, but in terms of art-specific stuff, then I will get somebody who's a lot more knowledgeable than that. So I don't know whether Sam Rickson was in earlier. She may or may not still be here, but if we do have any artists, perhaps you could let Kelly know in the chat. That would be excellent. Kelly Johnson asking what happened to Dawn's 10,000 spears at the Trident. They lost is the short answer. Oh, Sam Rickson is there with a little super chat, a super sticker even. Thank you so much. If perhaps you might be able to help out Kelly with where to put Game of Thrones fan fiction and art, that would be amazing. And the answer there is Twitter, DeviantArt, Reddit, A Song of Ice and Fire, on Fan Art Fridays, Instagram. So there we go. If anyone's wanting to know the best places, those are the best places to look for fan art. Okay, let's go to a question from. Actually, let's actually, for one moment, I said what I would do was just tell you what my plan is for next week. And why don't I do that now? So next week is going to be my last live stream of the year, because the 2 following Thursdays are Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and no one wants to be doing live streams on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. I'm sure you will have many more exciting things to be doing. But next week, I thought I would do a charity live stream. I did in the summer. I did, you may remember, I did a charity. It wasn't quite a live stream. It was a premiere, and I was blown away by the support of everyone in the Song of Ice and Fire community, with the generosity. And I'm going to do this. I think it's really important that those of us who have got voices for whatever reason and can encourage people to just try and make the world a little bit of a better place do that. So this is something I'm trying to do a couple of times a year now. And I'm going to do the same charity I did last time, actually, because I think this is a fantastic and really important thing to remember, is that we've all had a horrible year. Almost everybody here has had a horrible year for various reasons. But there are always people who've had it worse. And International Rescue, which is a fantastic name for a charity, they were the semi-official charity of the Game of Thrones, the TV show, because what they do is they go into war zones and they get people out, people who are non-combatants, refugees who just need some shelter, who need some food and drink. They go to people whose lives have been ripped apart for no reason, no harm or hurt at all. And these things are still happening, even in a time of COVID, and we're rightly thinking about everything that's going on in our own countries, in our own families. But there are always people who have things which are going on which are even more horrendous. So that's what it's going to be about next time. And when I say it's going to be a charity live stream, what that means is that every bit of income from that will go direct to the charity. So none of it gets creamed off by me, and none of it gets creamed off by YouTube, as far as I'm aware. I will double check that beforehand, but that was certainly the case last time. Any super chats, super stickers, that money, normally YouTube take a big cut of that anyway. They're not going to do that. And I will be personally donating any money I get from advertising afterwards. And last time, in an hour, we managed to raise nearly $3,000, which absolutely blew my mind. So next week, next Thursday, normal live stream, but I'm going to have it as an open Q&A. It's going to start off with me, but then I'll do it for 3 hours, and I will have some special guests. I haven't invited anyone yet, but I will think of some people who can come along, and hopefully we can have a really good conversation with some special guests. So I'm really excited about this, just as a chance to give something back, and I hope you are too, and I will start advertising it very soon over Twitter and all the usual places. So I hope you'll be able to join me next week. It's something that I'm very passionate about, is just this opportunity for those of us who have got something to spare to actually use it to help those who desperately need it. Anyway, that's enough about next week. Let's go back to some questions from my patrons. Eric Fugg, question about how do you evaluate Robert's use of an insanely heavy warhammer? It doesn't seem very practical to use in all circumstances. If anything, it is high risk, high reward. If he lands a blow with it, the opponent is crushed. I have no idea how you defend swift attacks from swords and daggers with an enormous hammer. Do you think this fighting style contributed to Robert's many injuries during the rebellion? I think it definitely did. And I think this is one of those times when the weapon is an expression of the person. So Robert Baratheon's fighting style seems to have been just to charge in with a warhammer and just hammer away. It is not a defensive weapon. It's not a tricky weapon. It's not a clever weapon. It's not a distance weapon. It's about just going in there and inflicting damage. And that is what focused on one thing, and that is all about Robert Baratheon. So I think this, as much as anything else, is George R. R. Martin telling us about the character of Robert Baratheon, and that does indeed lead to the implications of what that would have been for war. It meant that he had to be right in to the middle of the battle in order to be inflicting damage on people, and he did get hurt. He got hurt a lot through this, and that is something that he was George R. R. Martin mentions several times, and it's also probably why he was incredibly strong. And when he did stop fighting and charging around and doing things all the rest of it, he was just being king. He did add on the layers of fat. So it's very much this Henry VIII. We always think of him as being like Robert Baratheon and Henry VIII, but that's because we think about the later Henry VIII, the sort of massive size, lots of feasts and banquets and debauchery. But in his early days, Henry VIII was a fine figure of a man, as far as we can tell. He was tall, he was strong, he was great at jousting and all the rest of it. So that's the kind of the feel that we have for it. Katie Smith saying, I hope you and Dan are doing well this holiday season. Thank you, we are. Dan is my dog, for those who do not know. Do you think that Tywin Lannister switching loyalties was due only to his pragmatic sensibility of backing the winning side, or could it give evidence to the theory that Aerys was the real father of one or more of his children? Obviously, their relationship soured over the many years he served as Hand, but to help destroy the house of his former best friend seems like it might run a little deeper. Yeah, so definitely pragmatism was the main thing here, I think. But Tywin tried a number of different times to get his family into power through the way that he wanted to, through the normal means of doing it, so to speak. He was Hand of the King. He tried to get his daughter married to the Crown Prince. He wanted to have his son inherit and marry somebody who would be politically advantageous. And all of that was getting scuppered by Aerys. And so it's almost as if Tywin is there going, okay, what else can I do? All the things I thought I might be able to achieve, I cannot do that with Aerys in control. So there's also an element of, well, how else is Tywin going to get power? And that's what he was wanting. He was always thinking about the power and the strength of his house, of House Lannister. So that definitely is a thing that was a part of this. Do I think it adding evidence to the idea that maybe Aerys was the father of one of his children? I mean, I don't think this sways one way or the other, to be honest. I think that if he'd thought that before, then I think he probably would have done something beforehand. It comes to the point, we get the quote from Tywin, I can't prove that you're not my son. He wants to, in many ways, he wanted to believe that Tyrion wasn't his son. Now, incidentally, I said earlier, I'm doing this listen through again on of Game of Thrones, and one of the things I am specifically listening out for as I go through this, as well as seeing if there's any new stuff that I can get, but Tyrion, this idea of Tyrion, is he a secret Targaryen? I've said many times, this is the theory that I've oscillated on the most. I've swayed back and forth the most out of all the kind of the theories, because I can see the arguments on both sides here. And what I can say, having got, I don't know, a dozen or so chapters into the first book, is that at the moment there's a lot of evidence that he might be. In one chapter of Tyrion, we have so many things: him dreaming of dragons, being obsessed with dragons, visiting the dragon skulls and finding them beautiful, all of these kinds of things again and again and again, lots of hints. So that's where I'm at. I think this will probably get balanced against other things later, but I don't think that to answer the question, I don't think the possibility that Tyrion or one or both of the others were Aerys's was a main factor here. Pragmatism and how do I do the best for House Lannister is probably where we're at. Where should we get to? Shannon I. Adams saying, in a past video of yours, you posit that Peter Baelish intentionally misconstrued Lyanna and Rhaegar's relationship to Brandon Stark to avenge himself on Brandon. How responsible do you hold Baelish for Robert's rebellion? So I've answered the first part of that already, I think. How responsible do I hold him for the rebellion? I think it was inevitable at some point that there was going to be this fight. It's a matter of how it was going to happen. You get a block arising in the north. You get Rhaegar looking to be developing what looks like a coup against his father. Things were going to happen one way or another, and I think it's just that things just pushed in the right direction. Is he responsible? I think he's responsible for knowing that Brandon would not get a healthy welcome when he got down to King's Landing, I think, and he knew what he was doing. But did he know that Brandon was going to be killed and then Ricardo was going to be killed and then that was going to lead to a war? No, I don't think he knew that. He's not that omnipotent. It's a matter of he created chaos. And that is just a thing. He took that lesson from that moment onwards, that you don't have to have a huge plan of exactly how it's going to work. You just have to be then willing, once the chaos happened, to take advantage of it. And this ties in actually with a question from the late escapist saying, as Littlefinger is also the architect of the War of the Five Kings, this would make him the architect of two of the most transformative wars in the history of Westeros. Don't you think that this would make him a rival to Bloodraven as the prime mover of Westeros? Perhaps you should start saying, when in doubt, blame Littlefinger. Yes, I can see where you're coming from on this one. But I would say the difference is intentionality. Littlefinger, what I was trying to describe with Littlefinger is that he is intending to create chaos rather than knowing exactly what he's trying to do. Bloodraven is very intentional. He always is trying to achieve a certain end. He's trying to get something to happen. That is, and he's trying to do it from behind the scenes, but he's trying to guide events. Littlefinger is not so much trying to guide events. He is just trying to create chaos, because he thinks that he's the cleverest person around and he can make use of the chaos in order to get more power for himself. So that's a difference between the two. So if in doubt, should we blame Littlefinger? Yeah, a lot of the time we can do. But I still think that Bloodraven is behind more of the meta events, being aware of the others and things like that. Littlefinger's just trying to do things in order to get his own advantage. Anthony Visconti saying, "Hello, Robert. I can't help but think that this was actually Rhaegar and Lyanna's fault. If they had been less secretive for the year or so they spent together before the rebellion, then it might not have happened. Robert is a proud man, so he would have done something, but I'm not sure it would have been the war that happened." What are your thoughts? My thoughts are, as I said, I think the war would have happened one way or another. The fact that it was Rhaegar and Lyanna was a catalyst rather than anything else. That wasn't the main thing. If you get a king who is just going around murdering ruling lords and their heirs, that is going to create a civil war, regardless of what was happening with Rhaegar and Lyanna. So I think that that's the where I would go with that. In terms of, could they have been less secretive? I mean, they could, but I think that the idea probably, or what they probably thought, was that they would be able to get away with it until it was a done deal. They'd met up at Harrenhal, but then they had a long period where one assumes they were in contact, perhaps by Raven Mail or something like that. But with the best will in the world, they would probably want to meet up and see whether they got on in real life rather than just at a distance. So I don't think announcing before they got to the Tower of Joy, "Hey, by the way, everyone, we're eloping," I don't think that would have worked. When they got there, perhaps that then was the point where they decided, okay, fair enough. But that was the time when they suddenly realized it was too late, because by then the whole world was up in flames. The Purple Lord Leo Anansi. What part of Robert's rebellion or the tourney at Harrenhal did Bloodraven want, engineer, and have to counter? Okay, so I personally argue, and I've done videos on this, so if you want the detail, do go and check out the videos. I would personally argue that the year of the full spring is suspicious in the extreme. The idea that there is this sudden gap where suddenly it's sunny, and after, let's be clear, there were a couple of years of winter and nobody could get together and nobody could meet up and all the rest of it. The chances of the Starks coming south, that wasn't going to happen at all. So in order to make Lyanna and Rhaegar meet, you actually had to change the weather. And that, I think, is a thing that only, as far as we can tell, only the magic of the Children of the Forest seems to be the only thing that does anything along those lines. And so I think that creation of the full spring was the first thing that had to happen. Then we get the bringing together of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and I think that Howland Reed's role here is absolutely central. I think that him allowing himself to be beaten up by those three squires, getting the Knight of the Laughing Tree thing happening, then Rhaegar meeting them, that I think was all facilitated with them. So that, I think, was what was going on. I think that from Rhaegar's perspective, he had been guided for a very long time by what became known as the Ghost of High Heart, but at the time was the Woods Witch, who was down in Summerhall. So I think that, and she again has this Bloodraven colouring, white skin, red eyes. So that was also being manipulated. So Rhaegar was being manipulated into believing the prophecies that he needed to be believing, and therefore how to do it, and then Bloodraven brought them together. So that was what I think was happening. I think the end bit of it all, where Jon ends up in Winterfell, that certainly worked out the way that Bloodraven would have wanted it to. And certainly Howland Reed was there on the ground at the time when that decision was made. But beyond that, we don't know the details of it. So probably there was some input there, but we don't know anything else. there. Abby Nilonsai, that's, I've mispronounced that horribly. I do apologize. Didn't Thank you for the super chat. Didn't see a question with that. So if you do have one, please drop it in the chat. Hopefully one of the moderators will be able to pick it up if you do. Question from Mara Lee. Did Robert really love Lyanna, or did he just want her as a trophy wife and because of his friendship with Ned? I think he did. Well, I don't think love is the right word. I think he was obsessed with her. I think that was what was going on. He certainly didn't love her with a sort of a prioritizing her kind of agape love kind of thing. That doesn't seem to be where he was coming from. Ned notes that, he didn't really know her when he sort of, Robert grumbles about she shouldn't have been buried here, and she should have been sort of on a hill and all the rest of it. And Ned's going, nope, she wanted to be buried here. She told me that. You didn't really know her, he thinks to himself. So I don't think that there was that. I think that he was obsessed with her. Maybe that was a kind of a distorted sort of love. We'll never know. He certainly didn't seem to be able to get over her. That's for sure. Was she a trophy wife? I don't think that's what it was specifically. I don't think that. Yes, she was beautiful, but we're not told that she was like the outstanding beauty of the age or anything like that. I don't think it was that. I think she was an incredibly, from everything we've heard, an incredibly vibrant kind of person, and I think he just found that attractive, and that's understandable. Just having a quick flick to see if I can see question. Nope, I can't see anything from Abby, so I'm assuming that there was no question attached to that, but thank you so much for the super chat. Jordan Walker saying, hi Robert, new patron here. Welcome to my Patreon. I'm glad you're making use of one of the Patreon benefits for having prioritized questions. I've been enjoying your content since I stumbled upon it at the start of this difficult year. I now finally have the means to support your endeavors and repay you for being a welcome distraction. No questions, just a heartfelt thank you. Have a great Christmas. Well, thank you, Jordan. I really do appreciate that. Eric Fogg saying, what survivors of Robert's Rebellion are notable broken men? Ned clearly suffers PTSD from the Tower of Joy. Robert is a shell of himself. Benjen gives up his future. John Connington is becoming a kind of monster that Jamie may be finally breaking away from being. This is interesting. So George R. R. Martin uses this idea of broken. I did a video a while ago with Emma, you may know as Maester Emma, who we were talking about broken men. And this is a theme which runs all the way through A Song of Ice and Fire. And with broken men, these are people who have been affected by war and they have been broken by it. And then they come out the other side and hopefully they can then become better people because of the experience and can grow back from that old place. And we see that potentially with people like Sandor, potentially people like Theon, but a lot of people, they just become broken men with nothing to live for. Now, so who was broken? We see that in the War of the Five Kings. Lots of people being broken. Who was broken in Robert's Rebellion? Well, lots of people clearly were. I agree, Ned definitely has some kind of PTSD from the Tower of Joy. He has recurring dreams that are not good dreams. Robert Baratheon talks about how, he doesn't feel... he's never felt as alive as he did during the rebellion. Doesn't really enjoy being king anymore. Benjen, definitely, he wasn't actually involved in the war, but I think his experiences and guilt definitely played a huge role there. John Connington was definitely broken by it. One other character, I think, Richard Lonmouth, I love, and I try and refer people onto this as often as I can. Lady Gwyn, who's a friend of the channel and comes on here every now and then for a live stream or something, she has this fantastic theory that Richard Lonmouth, who sort of disappears from history and, as we've seen, was Rhaegar's squire, he is in fact Lem Lemoncloak. And if he is definitely a broken man, because he is not a good person. Now he's very multi-layered, but he's clearly broken. Bride of Fire saying, "Hi Robert, since we know Bloodraven seems to have a hand everywhere, do you think it was his intention to start the rebellion and get his family off the throne, or was it a byproduct of his other plans? Also, are there any live streams coming up with any other content creators?" So with the Bloodraven, did he intend to start the rebellion to get his family off the throne? I don't think that was necessarily the intention, but I think it ended up where he wanted it to be. The point was to get the birth of the prince that was promised. That was the whole point of it. And the war, the change in who was king and all the rest of it, actually, I think is of secondary importance. Oh, Alicia Kingston, hi, great to see you there in the chat. Saying, are there any live streams coming up soon with other content creators? I'm trying most of the time with my live streams at the moment. I'm quite enjoying just doing them me. I will get back in the new year to be doing a few pre-records with other content creators, just having the conversations. I think it gives us opportunities to talk around a subject a whole lot more, and I know a lot of people enjoy them. And next week, as I say, please do tune in for my charity live stream where I'll have a few special guests. Haven't invited them yet, but there will be some special guests. Abby with the question, thank you so much. Saying, thank you for reigniting my love for A Song of Ice and Fire. I think this is another super chat, actually, so thank you. That's very kind. Was Bloodraven was whispering to Aegon, influencing him to burn Brandon and cause Bran's birth? Right. So this is a theory, and I've played around with this theory before. This idea that the Mad King went mad because Bloodraven had been trying to make contact with him. Now, the arguments in favor of this, first of all, on the show, then the Mad King was just shouting, "Burn them all," which is exactly the kind of thing that if you were trying to persuade the King of the Seven Kingdoms to take on the others, and you're just trying to get a simple message across to them, then burn them all probably would be a way to get that across. And it certainly echoed the way that he was sort of repeating that, certainly echoed the Hodor thing of just repeating a phrase. That, however, is very much a show thing. He has other things that he's sort of saying in the books. He still gets obsessed by flames and all the rest of it, but the echoing of the Hodor thing isn't there so much in the books. The idea that Bloodraven did go back to try and contact his family is a very strong one. We know that he did try to go back and contact the people from his generation, at least, but it didn't work. He said that's what he says to Bran, is it didn't work. So when we say it didn't work, that probably means, though, that well, we know that you can go back in time through the weirwood trees and change time. We know that can happen in small ways. We've seen Bran do it, calling out to his father. His father heard someone calling out to him. We've seen that happen. And Theon thinks he hears somebody calling out to him through the weirwood tree as well. This definitely is something, and this is going to build up to the Hodor moment, which is going to be slightly different in the books, but it's going to be essentially the same. So might Bloodraven had gone back? It's possible. My personal take is probably not, because I don't think it was. I don't think it's needed. The Targaryens have always been obsessed with fire, and this is nothing new. There's nothing out of the ordinary for this particular Targaryen to be wanting to be burning things and people. That's what Targaryens do. Even the best of them threaten to burn down huge amounts of innocent people. I mean, and this is a point we kind of overlook, is if you were kind of listing, who are the good Targaryens. Well, you might. Aegon the Conqueror he definitely burnt down things all over the place without much care about who was caught in the crossfire. Queen Rhaenys, for example, burned Planky Town. Lots of innocent civilians killed there. Jaehaerys threatened to burn Braavos. That would have killed, I don't know, 1 million people or so. This is even the best of the Targaryens have got that in them somewhere. So I don't think this is a huge thing. The idea that it might cause Bran's birth because this would take Brandon out and then lead to Ned marrying Cat, and then that. I mean, I like the idea, but I don't think we've got any evidence for that one yet, unfortunately. Kelly Johnson, could the Mountain beat Azog the Defiler? This is mixing again the Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire. I think so, yes. Then question from Bonds. Hi, Robert. Can you fill in any missing information on what happened to John Connington after the Battle of the Bells? That's the Stony Sept. There seems to be nothing. Could Varys have helped him into exile? Could Jon Con have been involved in the Pisswater Prince swap, and so setting up helping Fagon? Do you think the missing time will be filled in The Winds of Winter or Fire and Blood Part 2? Well, we do have some information here. So John Connington was the Hand of the King. He tracked Robert Baratheon to Stony Sept and nearly caught him, but then lost. And he, Aerys II, then sacked him as the Hand of the King. And not only that, he stripped him of any titles, and he sent him off into exile. So that was all Aerys's doing, and sending him off and all the rest of it. When he went off into exile, he then found his way to the Golden Company. The Golden Company are the sellsword company, but they're very Westerosi. They're Westerosi exiles based. Now, they obviously started with the Blackfire Rebellion, but now lots of Westerosi people who end up in Essos might join up regardless of the Blackfire links in the past. So he was there with them for 5 years. Again, we know all of this from the books. He was there for 5 years. He rose up to the rank of second in command, at which point Illyrio then approached him and the leader at the time, whose name might be Mooton, I can't remember, so it evades me slightly, and he pitches this thing to them about them having got baby Aegon. And then this is John Connington's memories, and then John Connington remembers, so they came up with some plan that he wasn't that happy with, because he felt it, he didn't like having to lie about these things, but they came up with this lie about the fact that he tried to steal from the Golden Company. They spread this rumor that he'd drunk himself to death, and so basically he sort of disappeared, and that allowed himself to reinvent himself as Griff, and therefore be raising young Griff all the way through it. So I think we do have this sort of story mixed up, and I think incidentally this backs up the idea that Varys, who was obviously involved in all of this, probably having tried being the Master of Whisperers to Aerys II, and seen how he then sort of descended into bad things. Then he switched his loyalties to Robert Baratheon, saw how he descended into bad things. That's the point at which he thought, you know what, we do need a good king. How do I go about doing this? It was 5 years into Robert Baratheon's reign. That seems to be when he and Illyrio then started this plan. John Connington was not involved at the very beginning of this. He was somebody that Varys will have kept a track on so that he knew where he was, and he will have known that his loyalty will have been to Rhaegar, and therefore if he says that this is Rhaegar's son, he will get John Connington's loyalty that way. The Late Escapist says, Dear Robert, in A Game of Thrones, Robert said at one point Ned should have been king. I doubt Robert felt that way during the rebellion or immediately afterwards, but I wonder how would things have been different if Ned had become king. Again, this is a sort of one of these what-if kind of things. I don't think Ned would have wanted to become king. I think that, the point here is that Robert Baratheon was great at becoming king, but then once he was king, he didn't really enjoy it, whereas Ned seems to have understandably not enjoyed the concept of being at war. He did it because it was his duty, but that wasn't the thing. But when he was actually ruling the North, he seems to really grow into the role. That does seem to be something that he's genuinely good at. And so, as an observation, would Ned be a better ruler than Robert? Ned was a better ruler than Robert, and there's no real doubt about that. What if he had ended up on the throne? Things would probably have got I like the idea that he would have been a good and long ruler, but the fact is, when Ned was in King's Landing, he was out of his comfort zone. And the Lannisters and Varys and Littlefinger and all the plotting, he's just he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. Again, on my reread, one of the things which comes through abundantly, Cat is coming through as being very politically aware, and Ned is not. And there are times in the first couple of chapters when Kat is literally rereading it from her perspective, and she's there going, okay, Ned will figure this out in a bit, but I just need to be quiet because he needs time to think it through. And it's quite condescending, but it shows that she understands how things work in the South, and Ned doesn't. And I think that naivety would have probably cost him his life quite early on, has to be said. John Magician's in the chat as well. Hi there, Matt. Good to see you too. Having a lot of excellent content creators in here today. It's fantastic to see you. Question from B. After the disappearance of Lyanna Stark and the subsequent death of her kin, do you think the battle lines for this rebellion would have remained the same as they were? You've mentioned in other videos that Westeros was primed for rebellion, but how might the alliances have been specifically impacted by Lyanna's disappearance and or Littlefinger's lie about Lyanna's disappearance? I think I'm stick by my concept. War would have happened at some point, regardless, because you have Aerys, who is killing lords left, right, and center. He is making enemies. Rhaegar is wanting to stage a coup. It would seem there was going to be a war happening there anywhere. All that happens to get the rest involved is this emerging mass block, this alliance which is there between the North, the Stormlands, the Vale of Arryn, the Riverlands, potentially even the Lannisters getting in on the act with marrying Jaime in with Lysa. They have to then just have some cause that they want to that will spark them into action. So the Lyanna Rhaegar thing was, yes, that was a cause, but something even if it wasn't Brandon Stark coming down, something would have caused Aerys to do something to spark a war at some point soon. And I think that regardless, that would have happened. So we talk about this as if this is Rhaegar and Lyanna, but I think that as we saw, that wasn't really the main thing here. The main thing was that the war was always going to happen. Lindsay Petrujok, who actually I see you did say you don't need to try and pronounce my last name. I gave it a go anyway. I hope it wasn't too badly butchered. Saying, hi, Robert. This question is about Robert Baratheon before the rebellion, but I have to ask, is it strange that he was still being fostered in the Eyrie prior to the rebellion? At that time, I believe his parents were dead and he was old enough to be engaged and father bastards. So wouldn't he be old enough to rule the Stormlands? It seems strange that at a time when he could or should be ruling the Stormlands, he is in an entirely different kingdom. Or is this more evidence of Robert avoiding responsibility? I think this is a really interesting observation. Yes, so his father had died. He was the Lord of the Stormlands. And the fact that he was in the Eyrie at the time, he went there with Ned after they were both at the tourney at Harrenhal, and they decided to head off to the Eyrie because they were best friends, and this is where their foster father were. What does that say about him? Does this mean that even then he was just not enjoying ruling? Well, I think it's probably fair to say in that situation, where do you think Ned would have been, or Stannis? They would have thought that it was their duty to be staying at home and ruling their area rather than just hanging out with their friends somewhere else. So yes, I think this probably is an early hint that he was perhaps not as committed to the hard and boring bits of ruling than not as committed as he could be. So he's probably already delegated a huge amount of that to other people just to be doing it so that he can go off and do what he wants. But we don't know, but he definitely did seem to be dividing his time between the Eyrie and Storm's End at the time. Kelly Johnson, did Dany's implied threat to Sansa justify Jon's actions? I assume that's a show question. When in season 8, Dany was sort of there was a scene, I think, with the two, Dany and Sansa, when Sansa was sticking her ground and Dany was putting her foot down about being queen. Does that justify Jon's actions? I assume by Jon's actions you mean killing Dany at the end. I don't think it's that linear. I think that there are a lot of things that were going on there. And as I've said before, I think I've got videos from 3 or 4 years ago saying, will Jon kill Daenerys? I've thought for a long time he will. And I don't think that is the reason why. I think that there's a lot of other things going on there. I think that was, like much of season 8, that was just a shortcut to show us. Obviously, there had to be a meeting between Sansa and Daenerys, and there was going to be some tension. That much was needed, but they didn't develop it any further because they did everything so quickly in that season. Question from Ariel Winchester. Hi, Robert. Hope all is well. I've not had a chance to read the books yet due to nursing school. So this question may already be answered in the books. Why did both Rickard and Brandon go to King's Landing? Surely it wouldn't have been a smart move to have the Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell, along with his heir, leave the North together and head down south. I'm sure they weren't anticipating on being murdered, but still at this point, wasn't it known that Aerys was the shell of his former self and not all together? So what happened was, you get the Year of the Full Spring, tourney at Harrenhal, and Rickard Stark seems to say, okay, kids, go off, have fun. You've been stuck in the winter for the last couple of years or so. Go there. He stays up in Winterfell, and the 4 Stark children go down and to the tourney. After the tourney finishes, then the Starks head off in different directions. Ned, we know, heads off east with Robert Baratheon going to the Eyrie. Brandon goes up to Riverrun because he is engaged to Catelyn Stark, and they're going to be married there. That's the plan. Lyanna, we're not told, but she clearly stays around the area. My best estimate, for long convoluted reasons, is that actually she probably stayed in Harrenhal itself. Then Benjen, the youngest, heads up to Winterfell. Now he is the Stark who was in Winterfell, and then they just sort of like do a tag team. He arrives at Winterfell, and then Rickard can then come down south for the wedding of his son. So that's the situation. We've got the Starks moving around. Brandon was there in Riverrun. Rickard is now coming down south. And then that's the and as I was talking earlier about this idea about why was it that Littlefinger might have been the person who told the lie to Brandon. Brandon has left Riverrun and he heads out. It would appear, if it took him 2 weeks, he got to somewhere around the inn at the crossroads. And that's the point at which he hears this lie about Rhaegar and Lyanna, and he charges down to King's Landing. So he's not asking for anyone's permission. He is just hot-headed. He's going down there. We saw it already in the tourney at Harrenhal when he stood up and was outraged about Rhaegar crowning Lyanna, the Queen of Love and Beauty. And so he charges down, stands outside the Red Keep, shouts for Rhaegar to come out and all the rest of it. Basically, although, yes, we want to be sympathetic because of what happened later, this was not a smart move. He was going to the king and basically calling him out. And so, yeah, he gets captured. And then what follows is that, so he didn't go down on his own. He went down with his some of his friends. Now, there was his squire, who was a Glover. Then we had a Mallister, and I forget all of their first names, so you'll have to forgive me, but there was a Mallister, there was a Royce, and there was an Arryn. And so they all get locked up, and Aerys says, your fathers have to come down now. I wish to speak to your fathers. Okay, fine. So at this point, you have Rickard Stark, who was heading down south from Winterfell anywhere. Instead of turning off to go to Riverrun, he just carries on south and goes to King's Landing, at which point he also gets captured, and that's where the whole problems start. So that's why they were both there. Yes, it probably, with hindsight, it wasn't a very clever move, because they will have known that he wasn't the most rational of kings, but at the same time, they didn't both go there deliberately at the same time in order to do something, and they went with slightly different agendas. So that was what was going on there. And building on that, Lawnduck20 says, hi, Robert. I know it was right before the rebellion, but why was Ethan Glover the only one spared when Brandon Stark went to King's Landing to confront Rhaegar? Do you think someone asked Aerys to spare him, like Barristan did with Dontos during the defiance of Duskendale, or was it something else? What do you think? So this is just one of those intriguing little subplots that we're told that when Ned gets to King's Landing, and he's sort of, before he heads off in a cold rage over to Storm's End, he searches the jails, the black cells, and he discovers that Ethan Glover is in there, and he releases him. And Ethan Glover he was the squire to Brandon. He's a Glover, so he comes, he's from the north, and he is the only one of that group who survived. Now, why is this? Ethan, incidentally, after this, his survival of that one horrific fate didn't help him that much, because he was one of the people that Ned took with him to the Tower of Joy, so he just died a little bit later anyway, but such is life in George R. R. Martin world. But why was he spared? Now, I think the answer to this actually is just an accident of geography. And I think this is pretty good writing from George R. R. Martin, because it's the kind of thing that it doesn't make sense until you actually think about it, and then it does kind of make sense. So what seems to have happened is that when Rickard came down and Brandon was brought out, and if you remember, there was this really horrible kind of dual torture thing that killed both of them with fire and garroting, effectively garroting. It was horrible. He killed the father and son at the same time, basically, and that seems to have been what he did. Now, so he asked for the fathers to come down. The fathers couldn't really say no to a king. They weren't at war or anything at the time. Of course, they had to come down. They didn't know that they were about to be brutally killed. And so they did all come down, and it makes sense that he probably did this. Aerys, we're not told, but it probably wasn't just him. It wasn't just the Starks that he did this to. It probably been all of the father-son combos. Now, why was Ethan Glover spared? Well, because his father couldn't make it. Why could his father not make it? Because of geography. The House Royce, House Arryn are obviously in the Vale. House Mallister, they're up in north of the Riverlands. All of these could get there and arrive at about the same time as Rickard. So they probably did all arrive at roughly the same time. If Lord Glover had been called, Lord Glover is right at the north of the north. Deepwood Motte is a long way away. He would probably only have got about as far as Winterfell by the time he would have discovered that they were at war. So he just simply would not have got there. So his son was probably spared by the accident of geography that House Glover was a long, long way. And so when Lord Glover was called, he couldn't actually get down there, thankfully for him. But as I say, poor old Ethan Glover didn't survive all that long. Abby and the Loingsai, again, apologies for saying your name almost certainly incorrectly. Will Mia Stone have an important role to come? Mia Stone is Robert Baratheon's bastard daughter in the Vale. She is sort of befriending Sansa. She guides people up and down the Knight's Lance. Will she have an important role? I don't think it's going to be hugely important, to be honest. She will. We're going to have half a dozen, maybe, chapters of Sansa in the Vale in the Winds of Winter. There's a lot of subplots going on. There's the potential marriage with Harry Harding. There's the tourney that we've got coming up. There's Littlefinger's got a huge grain storage scam going on. We've got whatever's going on with Robb and Arryn. We've got the Lords of the Vale who don't like Littlefinger. We've got lots of different things happening up there. That will take us maybe half a dozen. It might be less than that. It could be 3 or 4. But in that, I suspect Mia Stone will be involved in there as somebody that she can talk to. And they're talking sort of on a level, because basically at the moment, as she is hiding as Elaine, she is sort of on a par with Mia Stone in terms of what she's pretending to be. She's pretending to be a bastard daughter of a High Lord. So they are sort of on a level, so she will be able to make a friend there. And I think that is basically where we're going to get to. But Sansa's not going to stay. She's going to head north up towards Winterfell. So I think that Mia's role is going to be minimal going forward. So somebody was saying, Sasak saying, I always forget about the grain hoarding. Yeah, it's one of these boring things, but it's going to be massive because winter is coming and he is going to be Littlefinger's hoarding all this grain. And we're told how huge the grain storage is in the Eyrie. And this is how he's going to be gaining control over huge amounts of people through his grain hoarding. Question from Mara Lee saying, since there were quite a number of people that knew about Rhaegar and Lyanna and the Tower of Joy, it is hard for me to believe that this knowledge would not have leaked out and Robert found out about it somehow. How do you think they were able to keep this knowledge away from Robert? I think it's because it was a war and there were two sides, and the people who did know a bit about it, or three sides even, I suppose you could argue, Team Rhaegar knew about it. People who are loyal to Rhaegar, and so mostly those are people who are based in Dorne, but also some people who were in Dragonstone and King's Landing, not people who were in the army, Robert Baratheon's army. So that is how it was kept from Robert Baratheon. I think that Ned probably only found out either when he was at King's Landing or when he was at Storm's End, somewhere towards the end. I don't think Ned knew from the very beginning. I don't think it was general knowledge around the world. And for those who don't quite get that, when we're saying here, lots of people knew about the Tower of Joy. This is one of these kind of like misnomers. I think that this was a secret place that absolutely nobody knew where it was. This is a watchtower along the Prince's Pass, which is the main thoroughfare into Dorne. Now, obviously, we already know that three members of the Kingsguard knew about it. Rhaegar, Lyanna knew about it. She gave birth, so there will have to have been at least one equivalent of a medical professional, a maester or someone probably was there. If one maester knew, more maesters would have known as well. If they were there on the King's, just off of the Prince's Pass, then House Fowler will know this was a time of war. They will be very aware if one of their own watchtowers is suddenly being taken over by three members of the King's Guard and the Crown Prince. They will be aware. If House Fowler was aware, then House Martell will have to be aware, because House Fowler wouldn't be able to do anything without say-so of House Martell. And the Tower of Joy would have had to be provisioned, and probably the Danes as Starfall. That's the most likely place. And the more you dig into this, the more you think, actually, this isn't incredibly secret. There are lots of people around it. But these are all people on one side, people who have got an interest in keeping this away from Robert Baratheon. Ariel Winchester, I think you touched base on this in one of your Robert's Rebellion videos, but why didn't Lyanna attempt to reach out to her family at any point? Couldn't she have sent a raven or someone she trusted with a message to her family so they wouldn't worry? Wouldn't she know they would have been concerned about her? Yes, I'm sure she knew that they would have been concerned about her, but she strikes me as being the kind of person who would want to do her own thing and then tell them about it once she's made a decision on something. Now, the timing of this is critical, in that it appears that Brandon found out very shortly after the Rhaegar and Lyanna meet up. Now, why is that important? Because when Rhaegar picked up Lyanna, let's assume that they went direct to the Tower of Joy. That, given the fact that they were probably staying off the main roads, probably 6 weeks or so. Now, it's a reasonable assumption that during that time they weren't in day-to-day contact, knowing exactly what was going on in the realms. They were trying not to be particularly overt in their movements. So the likelihood is, by the time they get to the Tower of Joy, that's the first point at which they can sort of check in and say, okay, what's actually happening in the world? And in that 6 weeks, we've had all the things that I've just been describing. Brandon charging down, being arrested, then the call to the fathers to come down, Rickard coming down, the murder of those two, and then the sending out of the message to Ned and Robert, demanding they come, Ned and Robert and Jon Arryn effectively declaring war, Ned heading off to the north, Robert Baratheon heading off south. That's the situation. The continent was at war. So by the time Rhaegar and Lyanna had actually reached their destination, everything had moved so swiftly it was suddenly out of their control. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, which family would she actually write to anymore? The Starks, actually, two of them are dead now, so she couldn't write to her father, she couldn't write to her eldest brother. Then there was Ned. Ned was at that point working his way through the mountains, then across water, then up into the north to try and get back up to Winterfell. The first time he could have any message from her, maybe she did send him a message, we don't know, was when he got to Winterfell. That just left Benjen, and I think Benjen already knew. And I think this about Lyanna and Rhaegar, and I think this was the guilty secret that I've done a video on it if you're interested, that led to him going to the wall at the end of it, because he knew, and the guilt of that and not saying something led to war. Certainly from his perspective, that would have been thousands of people who have died, and that will not have hung well with him, I suspect. So why didn't she? Because by the time she'd discovered that she'd arrived safely, it was already too late. There weren't actually that many Starks left around anymore to write to. And thirdly, I think she did already tell Benjen. So I think that is the reasoning. Joseph Armand saying, "Hey Robert, could you please give a detailed review of Ned's journey to and from the Tower of Joy? How long did it take for his party to get there, where the group stopped on the way, and the journey back? Where and in what order did he and Howland go, and how long did it take them? When did the two split up after they left the tower?" Well, I would love to have all of this information, but we don't. George R. R. Martin did not give us all of this detailed information, so I can tell you the information we have and the kind of the things that we can imply from, or draw implications we can draw from that. So Ned from King's Landing marched with his army down to Storm's End. That is about 2 weeks. He doesn't seem to have stayed at Storm's End long. The moment he arrived there, then the Tyrells just sort of like lowered their banners and left the field. So it's like, okay, fine. They relieved the siege. Stannis was given a nice meal. And then after that, it would appear pretty soon afterwards, maybe they stopped a day, who knows, but not long at all, Ned and his 6 companions headed off. Now, what route did they take? We don't know. We know that they were on horseback when they arrived, so the assumption is that they headed west across the Dornish marches. Then, when they reached the Prince's Pass, headed down there until they reached the Tower of Joy. That, it's hard to say exactly how long that would have taken. My best guess is maybe a month. So we don't know. They could have done it quicker than that. Maybe you could have got that far in a couple of weeks. George R. R. Martin, as I said, is very vague on timings. You could, and there are other routes if you want to. You could have taken a boat from Storm's End, taken it around the sort of the heel of the Stormlands around the Rainwood, and sort of come in. There's a sort of a river that heads that you could take it upriver deep into Dawn, and sort of that takes you up into the Red Mountains. Maybe they did it that way, but we don't know. Whatever it was, we're not told of anywhere that they stopped, and we're not told the exact route, but they arrived on horseback, and the implication is that they probably rode there. After that, we're told that only 2 lived to ride away, being him and Howland, so that everyone else died. Of the 10 people there, 7 on Ned's side, the 3 Kingsguard. So only 2 of those 10 lived to ride away. We know Howland was there at the Tower of Joy. We know that Ned went to Starfall. The implication is that Howland went with him to Starfall, but we don't know that. Then what happens after that? Well, Howland then disappears off the face of the planet. He ends up back in Greywater Watch. I've got a video if you want all the evidence leading up to it. My theory is that he meets up with Ashara. Ashara fakes her own death, and she heads up with him and their baby Mira to the the neck, and then they stay there. That is my theory on what happens there. So I think that Ned and Howland parted ways at that point. There's an intriguing thing about Starfall. We don't get much from George R. R. Martin, as you would expect, about Starfall, but when he was talking about Ashara Dane, I think it was once, and he said, she wasn't nailed down to one place. They have boats in Starfall, don't you know, and horses. So the clear implication is that somebody must get a boat into or out of Starfall. Otherwise, why mention them? And yes, it is indeed. It's an island. There will be boats there. Now, in terms of where Ned goes and who goes with Ned, Ned arrives sometime later. Again, George R. Martin doesn't give us the exact timing details, up at Winterfell with baby Jon and his wet nurse, who appears to be Willa, who comes from Starfall. So how does Ned and baby Jon and Willa, how do they get up there? Well, they move quickly. This much we know, because after the war has ended, and we don't know exactly what people officially counted as the war ending. Maybe it was when Robert Baratheon got crowned. Maybe it was when Ned was at Storm's End. We're not entirely sure. But after that, then Cat and baby Rob and Maester Lewin made their way up to Winterfell. They seem to have gone overground and will probably have been traveling reasonably slowly, given the fact that they've got a newborn baby and a new mother there. So but obviously Riverrun is a lot further north than wherever Ned was. So if Ned had to be outpacing them in order to get there, so he almost certainly took a boat. We know that he stopped off at King's Landing, and he then made peace with Robert Baratheon, we're told, over their shared mourning for Lyanna, and Ned told Robert a lie about who Jon's mother was. He said that her name was Willa, which he presumably got from the wet nurse. And then he probably didn't stop long, headed up, assuming, because he's got to move quickly, in a boat again up to the White Harbour. It's interesting in Game of Thrones when Cat is talking about getting from Winterfell to King's Landing quickly. She says that if you catch the boat, this is what she does. If you catch the boat, you can actually overtake people, and that's actually what happened. It wasn't, I think, in the show, then it wasn't 100% clear, but she arrives before Ned. In the books, she arrives before Ned in King's Landing because Ned is going overground, and she gets a boat, even though Ned had a head start. So that's what seems to happen, is he goes up to White Harbour and then charges up to Winterfell as quick as possible. So that's what we know, and those are what the implications are. I wish we knew more than that, but I don't think it changes the balance of the story that we are aware of. Diego Godoy says, Hola. My question is in regards to your Ashara and Howland equals mirror theory. Barristan remembers with some discomfort and anger that at the tourney at Harrenhal, Ashara danced with lots of people and then ended up going to the tent of the Starks. He doesn't specify which Stark. Was Howland Reed sharing that tent with the Starks? Could it have been him and not Brandon nor Ned, who she spent some time with? Quite a specific question, but I wonder if you think this matters on the A plus H equals M theory. Yes, it does, and I think it's a specific question, but it's really important here, I think. So it wasn't technically, that wasn't Barristan remembering those details. That was Howland. So this is the Mirror Jojen telling the story to Bran. So the bits about Ashara dancing with lots of people, that's definitely from Howland's perspective. And interesting is another little bit of evidence for Howland and Ashara getting together is that they tell this story. This is the story that Howland tells his children that many times over, and he tells this story about this beautiful woman with wonderful hair and beautiful eyes, and lists all the different people that she danced with, and this would be an incredibly weird story, given the fact that Mira was born quite soon after this. If this is not a How I Met Your Mother story, which is how the story is framed, then this is an incredibly weird story to be telling your children. Just before I met your mother, there was this amazing woman who she danced with this person and this person and this person. This is how she looked. No, this is very weird if it's not about their mother. But that's by the by. Yes, is the short answer. Howland, we're told, was sharing Ned's tent. He was invited to share Ned's tent. We're also told by Harwin, who is someone who Arya randomly runs into at High Heart, I think it is, and with the Brotherhood, and he was a Stark retainer, and he has, he's told about this rumor about Ned and Ashara Dane, and he says, so what? He'd heard that rumor too. He obviously hadn't been a witness. He'd heard that rumor too, and he says, so what if some words were spoken in a tent, or some kisses or more? Doesn't matter. And that's the reference to a tent is fascinating, because clearly this is Ned's tent. People saw Ashara going into Ned's tent, and then there were rumors about why on earth was she going into Ned's tent. But it wasn't just Ned's tent, it was Howland's tent too. So yes, I think that this is very important in just adding into this detail, is that people probably got it wrong. They would have assumed that Ashara, as everybody assumed, that Ashara would obviously be going for a Stark, because why would you go for a Mudman? But this is, I think, the story that George R. R. Martin is wanting us to see, is that Howland actually is a lot more than that. So, Bond Robert Maggie the Frog says that Robert Baratheon would have 6 and 10 children. How many can be placed or named? Are there any missing children from Robert out there? So these are Robert Baratheon's bastard children. Now, who do we have? We've got Mia Stone, we've already talked about at the Eyrie. There's Bella, who is at Stony Sept, who claims to be, she's not acknowledged. There's Gendry and Edric. There's Barra, the little baby that Ned goes to find in book 1, and then Littlefinger tells a story of there being twins as a result of when Robert Baratheon was at Casterly Rock, and how that was too close to home for Cersei, so they were got rid of very quickly. The rest were all, if you remember, after Robert's death, they were all rounded up and killed, basically. So the short answer is probably there are others, but people just don't know about them. But of the main characters who are out there, we got who are left, we've got Gendry, we've got Edric, we've got Mia, and we've got Bella. So those are the ones that are there. I've got 3 more questions, I think, from my patrons. So now is the time to drop any more questions into the chat, and I'll try and get through as many of them as I can. Shannon I. Adams saying, "Hey Robert, thanks for all the great content. Your voice is a warm blanket in this crazy world." Thank you. A warm blanket, lovely thing to say. Just wanting to do a bit of alternate history speculation. Listening to the Feast for Crows currently, where Cersei says that she never forgave Robert for killing Rhaegar. She also says that if she had married Rhaegar, he would never have looked twice at the Wolf Girl. What do you think would have happened if Cersei and Rhaegar had been betrothed after the tourney at Lannisport? Well, I mean, this is one of these kind of speculations. would he never have looked at her? I mean, this is one of those sort of ironies which is there in the story, which is that she hates Robert Baratheon for still loving Lyanna Stark, but then she looks back with adoration about this other person she could have married who also loved Lyanna Stark. So I think this says more about Cersei than it does about anybody else. I think this says that, her opinion of herself is very high there. Obviously no one would ever look anywhere else. The evidence with her marriage with Robert Baratheon suggests otherwise. Robert and Rhaegar were clearly very different people, though. So what would have happened if they had become, if they had been engaged at that time? I think, well, what we're saying in all of this is Robert's rebellion was in one way or another inevitable anyway. So she would have been the sort of the Elia figure in all of this to a certain degree, but we would still be getting the problems with Aerys just randomly killing people. So there would have been a war regardless, I think. But instead of the Martells being there on that side, possibly we're looking at the Lannisters, which would have been a very different kind of dynamic going on. Question from Catherine Furseth. Hi, Robert. Was Robert Baratheon's rebellion only a random occurrence in the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, just one of many possible outcomes, or was it destined by Bloodraven or by fate? What literary evidence does George R. R. Martin give us in regards to this? I don't think he gives us any particular literary evidence in this. I think this is one of those things that he allows us to draw our own conclusions on. He's very clear that he's not telling us, in contrast to, say, Tolkien, where it's always very clear there is a God and these things have to happen and some things are preordained and all the rest of it. That's not this world. George R. R. Martin is never going to go down that route. He's going to allow us to make up our own minds about whether things are preordained in one way or another. Was it manufactured is for me the bigger issue here, and that I think we've covered already. Bloodraven was manufacturing the bloodline of the prince that was promised rather than the who was actually on the throne, because Jon is the heir of that bloodline and the prophecy rather than anything else. So that's what was going on there. The Late Escapist saying, Robert Baratheon is hailed as the premier warrior in his time. Do you think there was anyone who could have, this is my last Patreon question, I think, actually. Do you think there was anyone who could have beaten him in his prime? I think probably Arthur Dane could have done. I think somebody who was a skilled fighter who could have avoided the Warhammer probably could have done. I think that Oberyn Martell is probably, given he showed his ability to do something quite similar against the Mountain, he's possibly also the case. And speaking of fantasy matchups, I'll do these ones as quick fire here. Who do you think would win in the following one-on-one death matches? Ned Stark versus Jaime Lannister. Depends on where and when they were in their relative ages, but I think left to their own devices, earlier on, Ned. Jaime at the height of his powers, Jaime, then Jaime after he lost his hand, Ned again. Corran Halfhand versus Mance Rayder. I will go with Corran. Victarion Greyjaw versus Stannis Baratheon. I'll go with Victarion. Stannis is a leader and a general, but he's not. yes, I'm sure he's a reasonable fighter, but that's not his main strength. Loras Tyrell versus Oberyn Martell. I have a soft spot for Oberyn Martell, so I will go for him over Loras. I think he's a lot more willing to fight dirty and be intelligent about how he does it. Ghost versus Borok's Giant Boar. Ghost every time in my world. Okay, let's quickly dive into the chat to see what's going on. Unlocked Academy LLC. What's the deal with Cersei saying her first son was Robert's? Is this in the book? That was a thing played up in the show. This was something in season 1. They had a few scenes that they created just for the show. What they felt was that they needed a scene between Cersei and Robert Baratheon that showed their relationship. They hadn't got one there. They see a lot of them different and apart, but they wanted a scene with the two of them where they could actually just talk about their relationship. And I think it was an excellent scene, but it was one which was written for the show. Kayvon Washington, does Gendry or Edric have a role in the rest of the story? Yes, I think they probably both will. Edric is over on lease at the moment, and I think that he probably will return. Lots of people are heading over to lease right now, so I think we will see him again. And Gendry, yes, absolutely. I think that although it's not the same as it was on the show, there is a clear link between him and Arya, and I think that they will come back together again at some point. So he will be heading up towards Winterfell, I think. But it's not going to be as big as it was on the show. Deprimitor, I can't even pronounce all of that. I do apologize, but you're asking, who do you think is the Valonqar in Maggie's prophecy, Jaime or Tyrion? My money is on Jaime, still on that. It just makes more sense for me of how their two character arcs. They certainly they certainly will die together. I mean, foreshadowing is the wrong word, but they both say we came into this world together, we all leave it together, and I think that is what's going to be happening. Question from Greek Weirwood saying, have they ever described Grey Water Watch? Not in terms of somebody actually going there, but we've got various bits of description. It's on a floating island, so it moves around. Is the main point there, and it's not made of stone. It's more a part of the swamp and all the rest of it. Reflective rambling, a leap and a half, but given her obsession with King's blood, could Mel's ruby necklace be one of Rhaegar's from his demise? Traces or symbolic bloodline? Well, that's an interesting thought. I mean, it is, as you say, it's a leap and a half. So Melisandre's got a ruby necklace, and she seems to use this as a glamour. And the other time we hear about lots of rubies is that there were lots of rubies on Rhaegar's breastplate, and this was called the Ruby Ford afterwards because after it got caved in by Robert Baratheon, the rubies went flying everywhere. And might she have one? I don't think so. There's no evidence that she has, but perhaps, I don't know. I mean, it's if she has, they'll have to find some way for her to have got them, because she's been in Essos for, as far as we can tell, for almost all of her life until just before the start of the story, just a bit before the start of the story. So there's no obvious way that she would have got them. Question from Yon saying, hey Robert, love your content and streams. What do you think would have happened if Ned reached King's Landing before Tywin? Do you think Tywin would fight Ned or help him siege the city? I think he would have helped him siege the city. I don't think he was. The whole point was that Tywin at that point had decided to be that he wanted to be on the side of the victor, and fighting Ned Stark, who was down with a chunk of Robert Baratheon's army, was not the way to do it. He wanted to get into King's Landing quickly so that he could prove his loyalty to the new king. Killing his new or attacking his new king's best friend was not a way to do that. Kelly Summers saying, first time able to join live. Welcome. Great to see you. Related to last week's video and the Horns video, since Targaryens are likely to have actual dragon ancestry, could Dragonbinder have had some small effect on Dany? It could do, though it does depend on exactly. We haven't seen it in action near dragons, so I don't know. But my guess, Dragonbinder, if the name is right, does seem to imply binding one thing to another. So perhaps it is binding the dragon part of a person to another dragon. That is something we do not know. Okay, I think that is probably all I'm going to do. But what I want to do is remind you of next week. Next week is going to be my last live stream of the year, but I'm going to do it as a charity live stream, and I love as many people as possible to be there. This is going to be supporting a fantastic charity who care for people who are caught up in war zones, people who are refugees through no fault of their own. That war is happening around them, and they just need to be got out and need to be cared for. And so I would love you to come and help out next week. I will have some special guests on, and I'll have just an open Q&A, and it will be great. So that's what's happening. I've really enjoyed this one. I've always liked talking about Robert's Rebellion. I think it's a fascinating subject. One of my favourite sort of bits about the backstory of the whole world. So anyway, take care, everyone, and I shall see you again next week. Oh, first of all, links. If you're watching later, there'll be a link here to other live streams, and there'll be a link here to my Patreon. Okay, going for good this time. Bye.